Millionaire CEO lost everything to his wife's lover. His black maid saved him and his triplets. You think you can crawl back now that he's ruined you? Damien's voice thundered, shaking the marble walls as his wife staggered forward, eyes wild with desperation. Behind him, the maid gathered the triplets into her arms, their cries piercing the silence like knives. The woman who once mocked his downfall now reached for children who turned from her touch, burying their faces against the only mother they had left. For years he'd been blind, broken, betrayed. But tonight, as he stood between the woman who destroyed him and the one who saved him, Damien knew the truth. Love had chosen its side. But what about you? Would you forgive a betrayal this deep? Would you let blood ties outweigh loyalty and devotion, or protect the love that never abandoned you? My beautiful family, I just want to take a moment to thank God for each of you. Through all the trials and pauses, you've stood by me, and your love has been a light in my journey. Tonight, I pray that the same love you've shown me returns to you 100-fold. May your homes be filled with peace, your hearts with joy, and your paths with grace. If you feel blessed to be part of this family, click subscribe, turn on the notifications, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, so I can keep lifting you up in prayer. And by God's mercy, tomorrow we'll meet again with another story just as powerful as this one. Amen. The tower stood like a monument to ambition. Sleek steel, endless windows, a sharp crown that seemed to spear the sky itself. Coal Industries headquarters. To the outside world, it was a fortress of power, and its king was Damien Cole. On the top floor, in a boardroom lined with black marble and glass, Damien commanded silence the way other men commanded armies. A dozen executives leaned forward as his voice rolled across the table, measured but thunderous, cutting through the hum of the city beyond. Growth is survival, Damien said, pressing his palm flat against the glowing projection. Charts and numbers lit up his strong features. We don't just sit on what we've built. We expand, innovate, take risks while everyone else is too timid to move. That's why Coal Industries is here, and that's why we will still be here 10 years from now. He spoke with a conviction that made even skeptics nod. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose presence filled a room before he said a word. His suit was tailored so sharply it could cut, and the weight of his gaze was heavier than any figure on the spreadsheets. But even as he delivered his vision, Damien's eyes flicked briefly toward the reflection in the glass wall. Behind the steel mask of authority, there was a weariness, a hollowness he didn't let anyone see. The room broke into murmurs of agreement. A senior executive cleared his throat, daring to ask, "And the risks, Mr. Cole?" Expansion into Europe could backfire. Some are saying we should wait a year. Damien's jaw flexed. He didn't snap, not yet. Instead, he leaned forward, lowering his voice, and somehow that was more intimidating than shouting. Numbers don't lie. Waiting is weakness. Weakness gets swallowed. Do you want Coal Industries to swallow, or be swallowed? The question hung in the air. No one answered. They didn't need to. Damien already knew the answer. Meeting adjourned, he said, and the men and women scattered like pawns released from a chessboard. As the room emptied, Damien lingered, staring out at the sprawl of Manhattan. The city buzzed below, alive, untamed, relentless. It mirrored him. Or maybe mocked him. His phone buzzed against the polished table. Damien picked it up, expecting a message from his secretary about the next meeting, but the name flashing on the screen made his brow tighten. Vanessa. It wasn't unusual for his wife to call, but the timing, the frequency lately, the clipped conversations that ended when he entered the room, they were no longer the calls of a devoted partner. He swiped to answer. Vanessa. Static. Then her voice, cool and airy, like champagne poured into a crystal flute. "Oh, Damien. I forgot you had a meeting. I'll call you back later." Her tone wasn't apologetic. If anything, it sounded distracted, almost amused. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Yes, of course. Don't worry about me." A pause. The muffled sound of another voice in the background. A man's, low and intimate, too close to the phone. Vanessa's laugh followed, soft, musical, but not meant for him. The call ended abruptly. Damien stared at the phone. His fingers tightened around it until the leather case creaked. He set it down carefully, too carefully, and forced his breath to steady. He could not afford suspicion, not here, not now. But the splinter had entered. And Damien Cole knew better than anyone that even the strongest walls cracked from within. That evening, the penthouse loomed over Central Park, marble floors polished to a mirror shine, chandeliers casting golden light across a space more museum than home. Damien's footsteps echoed in the foyer as he entered. The place smelled faintly of roses and expensive perfume. Always roses. He wondered when the scent had begun to feel suffocating. "Vanessa," he called. His wife appeared at the top of the staircase, a vision of elegance, silken dress hugging her figure, diamonds glittering at her ears, lipstick painted like armor. She was stunning, as she always was. Stunning and distant. "You're late," she said, descending gracefully. Her phone glimmered in her hand, screen lighting her face in quick bursts. She didn't kiss him, didn't even brush her fingers against his. "There was a board meeting," Damien said. "There are always board meetings," Vanessa replied lightly, already turning away, her voice trailing as she headed into the living room. "Dinner's in the kitchen. I'm meeting some friends later." Friends. The word was an arrow aimed at his patience. Before Damien could answer, a shriek broke through the cold air. "Daddy." 3 small figures burst from the hallway, his triplets, 2 boys and a girl, tumbling over each other in their race toward him. The marble foyer filled with laughter, the sound so bright it chased shadows into corners. Damien dropped his briefcase without hesitation and crouched low, sweeping all 3 into his arms at once. "You're going to knock me over," he chuckled, staggering under their combined weight. "What's this, a wrestling match?" The boys clung to his sleeves like monkeys, giggling, while the girl pressed her tiny face into his chest, her curls tickling his chin. Their warmth seeped into him, filling the hollowness he'd carried since morning. "Did you miss me that much?" "Yes," all 3 shouted in chorus. From the corner of the room, a soft voice added, "They wouldn't nap." "I tried everything, Mr. Cole." Damien looked up. Naomi stood near the archway, her simple uniform neat, her dark skin glowing against the chandelier's light. She was in her late 20s, maybe early 30s, with features that carried quiet strength, eyes that noticed everything, lips that rarely spoke unless necessary. "You did fine," Damien said, still holding the children. "Better than fine." "Thank you." Naomi's expression softened, though she kept a respectful distance. "They'll calm down once they've had their supper." The children disagreed with loud protests. "No. Stay with Daddy." Naomi's smile tugged faintly at her lips. "See? You're their favorite toy." The words were gentle, but Damien felt their weight. It wasn't Vanessa who brought laughter into this house. It wasn't Vanessa who soothed tears or tucked blankets under small chins. It was Naomi. His eyes lingered on her a moment too long. She lowered her gaze, as if she had felt the heat of it. Behind them, Vanessa's laughter rang out again, drifting from the living room. Not laughter meant for him, never for him anymore. Naomi shifted, as if debating whether to say something. In the end, she didn't. She only watched him with a gaze full of something Damien couldn't name, concern maybe, or something deeper. He kissed his daughter's hair, but his jaw clenched. The cracks in his world were spreading. And though he didn't know it yet, the ground beneath him was already beginning to give way. Dinner was an awkward ritual in the Cole penthouse. The table stretched long and glossy, polished to a mirror sheen. Platters of food arrived steaming from the kitchen, a small army of staff moving like clockwork. Yet despite the opulence, silence often filled the air. Damien sat at the head of the table, a glass of red wine untouched before him. At his right sat Vanessa, scrolling on her phone between half-hearted bites of salmon. At his left, the triplets fidgeted, whispering to each other, giggling when they thought no one was watching. Naomi sat farther down, close enough to tend to the children but positioned carefully, as though invisible by design. "Eat your vegetables," Naomi murmured gently, guiding a fork toward one of the boys. "No," he giggled, pushing it away. "Yes," Naomi replied, her tone soft but firm. "Strong boys need greens." Damien watched the exchange with quiet amusement. His son obeyed, not out of fear, but respect. Naomi had that effect. She didn't command, she guided. And somehow, it worked better than any raised voice. "Vanessa," Damien said after a pause, his voice breaking through the silence. "I thought we might take the children to the lake house this weekend. They'd enjoy the fresh air." His wife's eyes flicked up briefly, then back to her phone. "I already have plans. We can reschedule." "I said I have plans," she interrupted, her tone sharp enough to cut. "Business dinners. You know how it is." Damien's jaw tightened. He knew. He also knew the difference between business and whatever it was she had been sneaking around with. But he held his tongue. The children's laughter rose again as Naomi told them a quiet story to coax more bites from their plates. The warmth she radiated filled the cold space Vanessa left behind. When dinner ended, Vanessa disappeared upstairs without a word, heels tapping like gunshots on marble. Damien remained at the table, sipping his untouched wine. The triplets clambered into Naomi's lap, their small bodies leaning against her as if she were the safest place in the world. "Naomi," Damien said softly, watching the scene. "Do they give you much trouble?" She looked up, surprised to be addressed so directly. "They're children, Mr. Cole. Trouble is part of the job. And you never complain." Her eyes held his for a moment, steady, unflinching. "Because they're worth it." Something in Damien's chest shifted, a pressure he couldn't name. He cleared his throat, stood, and walked away before it showed on his face. Later that night, Damien wandered the halls of his penthouse. The chandeliers glowed low, casting long shadows across the walls. Vanessa's voice drifted faintly from behind the master bedroom door, low, hushed, conspiratorial. He paused outside, his hand hovering over the handle. "Don't worry," she was saying, her tone honey-slick. "He doesn't suspect a thing." Damien's pulse quickened. He strained to hear more, but the words blurred into laughter, light, playful, intimate. His fingers clenched around the doorknob. He could burst in. Demand the truth. End the gnawing suspicion once and for all. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped back, forcing his breath to slow. Confrontation now would mean chaos, for him, for the children. And Damien Cole had built his empire on control. He would not lose it here. Not yet. He turned away, the hollow echo of Vanessa's laughter following him down the hall. In the nursery, the world was different. The triplets slept soundly, their breaths rising and falling in soft rhythm. The room smelled faintly of baby powder and lavender. Night lights glowed warm, painting everything in gold. Naomi sat in a rocking chair, a book open in her lap though her eyes weren't on the pages. Instead, she watched the children, a quiet tenderness in her gaze. Damien stood in the doorway for a moment, unseen. He wasn't sure why he lingered. Perhaps it was the peace of the scene, so unlike the tension strangling the rest of the penthouse. Perhaps it was the way Naomi's presence filled the room, grounding, steady, unpretentious. He stepped inside. The floor creaked softly under his shoes. Naomi looked up, startled, then straightened. "Mr. Cole," she whispered. "I didn't hear you." "I didn't mean to interrupt," Damien said, lowering his voice so as not to wake the children. "I just wanted to check on them." "They're fine," Naomi replied, her lips curving into the faintest smile. "They always sleep better when you're home." Her words struck deeper than she intended. Damien swallowed. "Thank you, for everything you do for them. I know they'd be lost without you." Naomi's eyes flickered, a hint of emotion breaking through her professional composure. "They're good children. They just need love. Consistency. That's all any child really wants." Her gaze lingered on him for a heartbeat longer than expected. Damien felt it like a warmth spreading beneath his skin. "Good night, Naomi," he said finally, turning before the moment stretched too far. "Good night, Mr. Cole." He walked back to his wing of the penthouse, but Vanessa's laughter still rang in his ears. And in the quiet space between that sound and Naomi's gentle words, Damien felt the stirrings of a truth he wasn't ready to face. The following morning, Damien left for work earlier than usual. The city was gray with rain, the sky heavy, streets slick. He rode in the back of his car, staring out at blurred lights. His mind replayed fragments of the night before, Vanessa's voice behind a door, Naomi's quiet steadiness in the nursery, the children's laughter filling the dining room. Two worlds pulling him in opposite directions, one brittle, hollow, full of deception, the other grounded, warm, unspoken. He pressed a hand against his temple. Damien Cole was not a man who let emotions cloud his judgment. Yet here he was, caught between suspicion and longing, betrayal and hope. And though he didn't know it, the scales were already tipping. The storm outside hadn't eased since morning. Rain streaked the penthouse windows like silver threads, thunder rolling somewhere distant. Inside, the atmosphere was no less charged. Damien arrived home earlier than expected, his briefcase still in hand. He expected silence, the children napping, Vanessa out with her friends, Naomi quietly managing the household. Instead, muffled laughter drifted down the hallway, too sharp, too careless. He froze, keys still in his grip. That sound didn't belong to the triplets. It was adult laughter, low, masculine, and it didn't come from the children's rooms. Slowly, Damien followed it. Each step seemed to echo louder than the storm outside. The sound grew clearer near the study, a room Vanessa rarely entered. His hand hovered over the door, his pulse drumming. He pushed it open an inch. Inside, Vanessa leaned against the mahogany desk, her body angled toward a man Damien had never seen before. Tall, sleek, with a smirk carved into his face like it had been born there. His hand brushed Vanessa's wrist, lingering. "Don't be nervous," the man said smoothly. "He's too blind to notice." Vanessa laughed softly, the same laugh Damien had overheard behind their bedroom door. "You don't know Damien. He sees everything. But he'll never admit it. His pride won't let him." Damien's breath locked in his chest. For a moment, rage surged so fiercely his vision blurred. He wanted to tear the door open, drag the man out by his collar, demand answers. But he didn't. He stood frozen, every muscle trembling, watching his life unravel through a crack in the door. The lover leaned closer, whispering something Damien couldn't catch. Vanessa tilted her head back, her smile cruel in its familiarity, the same smile she used to reserve for him. He shut the door before his stomach turned. Hours later, Damien sat alone in his office on the lower floor of the penthouse. Papers lay scattered across the desk, untouched. His glass of bourbon remained full, amber liquid catching the lamplight. He pressed his palms into his eyes, willing away the image of Vanessa's laughter with another man. It wouldn't fade. The children's voices broke the silence, drifting faintly from the nursery upstairs. Light, innocent, unknowing. Damien's chest tightened. They were the only pure thing left in this house. A soft knock pulled him from his thoughts. The door opened just slightly. Naomi stood there, hesitant, her eyes searching his face. "Mr. Cole," she said quietly, "the children are asking for you." Damien nodded, his throat too tight to answer. She lingered. "You look tired." He almost laughed at the understatement. Instead, he said, "It's nothing. Just a long day." Naomi stepped inside, her presence grounding like always. She didn't pry, didn't press, just watched him with steady eyes that seemed to see more than he said. "Sometimes," she murmured, "the hardest battles are the ones no one else can see." Her words pierced deeper than she could know. Damien swallowed, forcing composure back into place. "Thank you, Naomi," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "I'll come up in a minute." She nodded, leaving the door ajar. Her quiet footsteps faded down the hall. For a long moment, Damien sat still, the storm raging outside mirrored by the one inside his chest. He was a man who had built an empire on control. But in the span of a single overheard laugh, he realized his world was no longer his own. And though he hadn't yet confronted Vanessa, one truth was clear: betrayal had crossed his threshold. That night, sleep refused him. He paced the penthouse halls, rain slashing against the windows. Every creak of the floor felt like a threat, every shadow a specter. He passed the nursery door, pausing only to listen to the soft breaths of the triplets. That sound anchored him, kept him from unraveling completely. As he turned toward his bedroom, he stopped short. The master door was slightly ajar. Voices again, Vanessa's low teasing, and the lover's deeper murmur. Damien's blood ran cold. He moved closer, each step deliberate. The lover's words came through clearer this time. "When he falls, everything he has will be ours. The company, the money, even this penthouse. You'll see." Vanessa's answering laugh was sharp as glass. "And he won't even realize until it's too late." Damien staggered back, the words slamming into him harder than any physical blow. This wasn't just betrayal of the heart. This was conspiracy. Treachery aimed at everything he had built. His empire. His fortune. His children. A thunderclap shook the sky outside, rattling the glass. Damien's reflection stared back at him from the window pane, pale, grim, unrecognizable. The man who had once commanded boardrooms, who had silenced doubt with a single glance, now stood hollowed by the truth. His wife and her lover were not just unfaithful, they were predators. And the hunt had already begun. If you were in Damien's shoes, balancing a cold marriage, 3 innocent children, and a loyal maid watching everything, what would you do? Hold on, or walk away. Drop your thoughts in the comments, I want to read them. The morning after the storm, the city gleamed wet, its skyscrapers reflecting streaks of silver sky. Inside Coal Industries, the atmosphere was no less electric. Damien strode into the boardroom, tie knotted, jaw locked. The executives waited for his word, but something in his presence felt different, sharper, more brittle. He delivered numbers, projections, strategies with his usual command, but his voice carried an edge that unsettled even his most loyal men. When one of them stuttered through a question, Damien's glare froze him mid-sentence. "Do the work," Damien snapped. "Don't waste my time with excuses." The room went silent. Heads lowered. Damien closed his laptop with finality, dismissing the meeting. As the others left, his phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa lit the screen, "Out shopping. Don't wait for me at dinner." His teeth clenched. He could almost hear the smirk behind the words. That evening, the penthouse felt cavernous. Empty wine glasses and shopping bags littered the marble counters. Vanessa had come and gone without leaving a trace of herself except her perfume, cloying in the air. The children played in the den, blocks scattered across the rug, their laughter clashing with the sterile silence of the rest of the house. Naomi sat cross-legged with them, her skirt folded neatly, her fingers deft as she built a small tower with the youngest boy. Damien lingered in the doorway, watching. For a moment, something in him softened. Here, in this circle of warmth, the noise of betrayal couldn't touch him. "Daddy!" one of the boys called, spotting him. "Help me. Naomi's tower is taller than mine." Naomi chuckled softly, shaking her head. "That's not true. You're beating me already." Damien crossed the room and crouched, setting his briefcase aside. "Let's see about this tower of yours." He stacked a block, then another, his large hands clumsy compared to Naomi's steady touch. The triplets erupted in cheers as the tower wobbled precariously. Naomi glanced at him, her eyes warm, almost protective. "You're braver than you think," she said quietly. The words startled him. He wanted to ask what she meant, but the sound of a door slamming upstairs cut through the moment. Vanessa's voice floated down, sharp, dismissive. "Naomi, have the children ready. I may need them dressed for dinner tomorrow." Naomi's lips pressed into a thin line. She said nothing, just nodded as if Vanessa could see her. Damien's jaw tightened, rage simmering in silence. Later, Damien entered the master bedroom. Vanessa stood at the mirror, fastening diamond earrings. Her dress was scarlet silk, slit high at the thigh. She didn't turn when he entered. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Dinner." "With who?" "Friends." The word dropped like poison. Damien stepped closer, his reflection towering behind hers in the mirror. "At least respect me enough not to lie." For the first time, she looked at him, her eyes sharp, unflinching. "Respect? Damien, you buried our marriage in boardrooms and late nights long before I ever looked elsewhere. You gave me wealth, yes, but no life. Don't play the victim now." Her words sliced deep, reopening wounds he hadn't admitted existed. She brushed past him, the scent of roses trailing in her wake. The door clicked shut, leaving him alone in the cavernous room, fury coiled like a spring in his chest. Naomi found him later in his study, staring at a tumbler of bourbon he hadn't touched. The storm outside had passed, but the weight inside hadn't lifted. "Mr. Cole." Her voice was cautious. He didn't look up. "You don't have to call me that when it's just us." She hesitated. "Damien, then." The sound of his name on her lips was strange, soft, grounding. "The children are asleep," she continued gently. "But they asked why their mother never tucks them in anymore." His throat constricted. He forced a breath. "What did you tell them?" "That she's busy. But they know. Children always know more than we think." Her words hung heavy. Damien finally looked at her, his eyes shadowed. For a moment, he almost told her everything. The voices he'd overheard, the man in his study, the way his world was crumbling. But pride chained his tongue. Instead, he muttered, "Go rest, Naomi. You've done enough." She studied him for a moment longer, as if searching for cracks in his armor. Then she nodded and left, her quiet footsteps fading down the hall. When she was gone, Damien pressed his hands over his face. His empire, his marriage, his sanity, they were slipping through his fingers. And deep down, he knew the storm wasn't over. It was only gathering. The night stretched long, the city alive with neon and shadow. Damien sat in the back of his black car, staring at the glow of his phone. Vanessa had texted again, "Don't wait up." He didn't answer. Instead, he told his driver to circle uptown. Something restless clawed at him, something darker than suspicion, instinct. The kind that had saved him in business when rivals tried to blindside him. The kind he couldn't ignore now. "Take me to the St. James Hotel," Damien ordered suddenly. The driver glanced in the mirror, but said nothing. The St. James was a discreet place, too discreet. Its marble lobby gleamed, quiet and expensive. The kind of place where secrets were bought and sold behind polite smiles. Damien's shoes clicked sharply as he crossed the floor. He ignored the concierge's curious glance, his pulse hammering in his ears. He didn't know what he expected, maybe nothing, maybe everything. And then he saw her. Vanessa. Draped in black silk this time, laughter spilling from her lips as she leaned across a booth in the lounge. Opposite her, the same man from his study, the lover. Tall, smug, his hand brazenly covering hers on the table. Damien froze, his vision tunneling. The air thickened, hot, suffocating. For a heartbeat, he considered walking away. Pretending. Letting the lie continue for the sake of his pride, his children, the illusion of control. But then the man leaned in, whispering something into Vanessa's ear. She threw her head back, laughing in that cruel, glittering way. And Damien broke. He stormed forward, the sound of his steps cracking like gunfire across the marble. Vanessa looked up. Her smile faltered. "Damien." The lover rose lazily, as if bored, a smirk twisting his lips. Well, well. The king himself. Rage flared white-hot. Damien grabbed the man by the collar, slamming him against the booth. Glasses toppled, shattering. Gasps rippled through the lounge. "You dare step into my house," Damien snarled, his voice shaking with fury. "Touch my wife, plot against me?" The man chuckled, unbothered even with Damien's fist digging into his throat. "Your wife came to me. You were too busy chasing money to notice she'd already left you." Vanessa's voice cut through, sharp and venomous. "Stop, Damien. You're humiliating yourself." Those words struck harder than any blow. Humiliating himself. As if he were the fool, not the betrayed. As if his pain was weakness, not war. Damien released the man with a shove that sent him sprawling back into the booth. His hands trembled, his breath ragged, but his eyes blazed. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "Not for either of you." He turned on his heel and walked out, the weight of 100 eyes stabbing his back. By the time he returned to the penthouse, the fury had drained into something colder, grief. He stood in the foyer, staring at the chandelier's golden glow. The house felt alien now, poisoned by Vanessa's laughter, the lover's smugness. "Daddy." A small voice broke through. His daughter stood at the top of the stairs, rubbing her eyes, curls tangled from sleep. Damien's throat tightened. "Go back to bed, sweetheart." She nodded but didn't move, her eyes wide with concern. She didn't understand. Not yet. But she sensed. Children always did. Naomi appeared behind her, gently resting a hand on the girl's shoulder. Her eyes met Damien's across the stairwell, steady, grounding. She didn't ask, didn't pry. She only looked at him as if to say, "I see you. You're not alone." Damien turned away quickly, afraid of what might spill from his eyes. In his study, he poured bourbon into a glass and stared at it until the amber blurred. The words replayed in his mind. "Your wife came to me. You were too busy chasing money to notice she'd already left you." Was it true? Had he driven her away with his endless boardrooms and late nights? Or had she chosen betrayal long before? The door creaked. Naomi stood there again, hesitant. "Mr. Cole, Damien," she corrected softly, remembering his request. He didn't look up. "You should be asleep." "So should you." Silence stretched. Finally, she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I don't know what happened tonight," she said gently, "but I know pain when I see it." Her words cracked something in him. He laughed bitterly, running a hand over his face. "Pain? Pain is watching everything you built, the company, the family, the marriage, slip into the hands of a man who doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you." Naomi's eyes softened. "Then don't let him take it. Don't let either of them." For the first time that night, Damien looked at her fully. She wasn't glamorous like Vanessa, nor dripping with jewels or perfume. But her strength was real. Her steadiness unshakable. And in that moment, Damien felt something he hadn't in years, hope. The city dawned gray, its light leaking reluctantly into the penthouse windows. Damien hadn't slept. He sat in the study, tie loosened, shirt unbuttoned at the throat, his eyes red-rimmed from staring at nothing for hours. The bourbon glass remained half-full beside him. He hadn't touched it. For once, alcohol couldn't drown what was clawing inside him. The memory of Vanessa's laughter, of her lover's smug words, replayed in his head on an endless loop. Each time, the sting was fresh, raw, unbearable. He was Damien Cole. He had stared down hostile takeovers, ruthless competitors, even governments. Yet a single betrayal from the woman who vowed to stand by him had undone him more completely than any rival ever could. And worse, he had no plan. "Daddy." The small voice cut through the fog. Damien looked up. His daughter stood in the doorway, dragging a stuffed bear by the arm. Her curls were wild, her nightgown wrinkled, but her eyes, those wide, knowing eyes, pierced him. "Why are you sad?" she asked softly. Damien's throat closed. He forced a smile, brittle and unconvincing. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just tired." She padded across the room, climbing into his lap. The bear tumbled to the floor. She pressed her tiny hand to his cheek. "Don't cry, Daddy," she whispered. His chest broke. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the lavender scent of her shampoo, fighting back the tears he swore he'd never let anyone see. Naomi appeared in the doorway, her figure framed by the morning light. She didn't speak, didn't intrude, just watched, her gaze steady, her presence quiet as a promise. When the girl finally drifted back to sleep, Naomi gently lifted her from Damien's arms, cradling her as if she were her own. "She sees more than you think," Naomi said softly. Damien rubbed his eyes, his voice rough. "They shouldn't have to see any of this." "No," Naomi agreed. "But children know when love is missing. They can feel it." Her words dug deep. Damien looked at her, really looked at her, at the strength in her arms as she held his daughter, at the steadiness in her eyes when his world was collapsing. "She'll destroy me," Damien whispered, the admission torn from somewhere raw. Naomi shook her head. "Only if you let her." Later that day, Damien forced himself into the office. The boardroom was a blur of voices, charts, numbers, but none of it registered. He sat like a ghost at the head of the table, nodding mechanically, his mind elsewhere. Every whisper sounded like mockery. Every glance felt like pity. Had they heard? Did they know? Was the story of his humiliation already bleeding into the city like a stain? When the meeting adjourned, Damien lingered behind, staring at the skyline through the glass walls. His reflection looked like a stranger, tired, hollow, haunted. A message buzzed on his phone. "Vanessa, we need to talk. Tonight." His stomach knotted. That evening, the penthouse was too quiet. The children were upstairs with Naomi, their laughter muffled. Damien sat in the living room, waiting. Vanessa arrived with a clatter of heels and the rustle of silk. She tossed her coat over a chair, poured herself a drink, and sat opposite him, legs crossed. She looked radiant, as always. Untouched. Untouchable. "You embarrassed me last night," she said coldly. Damien's jaw clenched. "You embarrassed this family." Her laugh was sharp, humorless. "Family? Don't make me laugh, Damien. You've been married to your company for years. I was just the ornament you forgot to polish. Is that what you call betrayal now? An ornament neglected." His voice cracked with fury. She swirled her glass, eyes gleaming. "You made me lonely. He made me feel alive. And soon he'll make me rich." The words were daggers. Damien surged to his feet, his hands trembling with the effort to keep them from shaking her shoulders. "You will not use my children as bargaining chips in your greed." Vanessa's smile was cold, cutting. "Watch me." She rose, brushing past him, her perfume cloying. "I'll be back when you've calmed down. Until then, enjoy your maid." The door slammed, echoing like a gunshot. Damien stood in the wreckage of silence. His chest heaved, his fists clenched. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless, stripped bare of dignity, of control, of the illusion that he was untouchable. He turned, and there she was. Naomi stood at the archway, her face unreadable. She had heard enough, maybe all. She didn't speak. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the gulf of marble floor and broken pride. Finally, Damien's voice cracked. "She's going to ruin everything," Naomi stepped closer, her eyes unwavering. Then don't let her. You built this empire with your own hands. Don't hand it to her lover. And don't let your children believe her lies. Her words steadied him like no drink, no strategy ever could. And in that moment, Damien realized the truth. The battle had begun. And he was already on the edge of losing. The week that followed blurred into one long, merciless grind. Damien buried himself in work like a drowning man clawing for air. Boardrooms. Phone calls. Contracts. Meetings stacked back to back until even his assistants looked drained. He demanded more numbers, more projections, more expansion strategies, driving his team harder than ever. Anything to keep from thinking. But the silence was always waiting. It pressed in on him during the elevator rides between floors, during the brief pauses before conference calls, during the endless city commutes in the back of his car. That silence carried Vanessa's laughter, the smug words of her lover, the sound of glass shattering in the St. James lounge. He refused to hear it. He would not hear it. He was Damien Cole. He had built an empire from nothing. Betrayal would not break him. Yet it already had. At home, he was a shadow. He avoided the penthouse as much as possible, coming back late at night when the children were already asleep, slipping into his study like a thief. When he did catch glimpses of them, their small faces lit up with hope before dimming when they realized how quickly he moved past them. They didn't ask questions. Children rarely did, but their eyes said enough. Naomi noticed too. She always seemed to be there when he arrived, tidying, folding, humming softly to soothe the twins, keeping the household afloat as Vanessa spent more and more nights away. She never pried, never asked, but Damien could feel her gaze on him like quiet gravity. It unsettled him. He wanted her to stop seeing him. He wanted everyone to stop. But she didn't. And that somehow made him both furious and grateful. Vanessa, on the other hand, had stopped pretending altogether. She flaunted her absence, her perfume lingering in the air long after she slipped out for another dinner or event. Once, Damien caught her lover's cologne on her jacket. Another time, she returned home laughing loudly into her phone, not even lowering her voice as she passed by the children's bedroom. The children. That was the one line Damien could not bear. He began to notice Vanessa pulling them into conversations, subtle at first. Don't you wish Daddy was home more often? Or, Mommy's friend says we should all go to the park together sometime. Damien clenched his fists at the thought. He would not let that man near his children. He would not let Vanessa poison them against him. But he had no proof. No leverage. No plan. Just rage simmering beneath his skin. And rage without direction was useless. One Friday night, Damien returned home earlier than usual. He needed, to see his children. To remind himself there was still something untainted in his world. The penthouse was unusually quiet. Naomi, he called. Her voice floated from the playroom. In here, Mr. Cole. He followed the sound and paused in the doorway. The twins were sprawled on the rug, building towers from colorful blocks. His daughter sat beside Naomi, carefully braiding the maid's hair, giggling as her small fingers fumbled with the strands. Naomi sat still, smiling gently, letting the child's hands tug and twist. For a moment, Damien couldn't breathe. The scene was so ordinary, so tender, that it pierced through the steel cage he had wrapped around himself. His children weren't just surviving, they were happy, safe, nurtured. Not because of him. Because of her. Naomi glanced up, catching his gaze. Their eyes locked, and for one unguarded heartbeat, Damien felt the ground tilt. He tore his gaze away quickly, stepping inside. The children squealed, rushing to him. Daddy. Damien dropped to his knees, pulling them into his arms, holding them tighter than he meant to. Their warmth, their laughter, their smell, it all rushed through him like medicine, like fire. Did you miss me? He asked, his voice rough. Yes, the twins shouted in unison. His daughter whispered, We always do. Damien's chest ached. He kissed her hair, then looked at Naomi again. She had lowered her gaze, returning to the blocks as if she hadn't seen his moment of weakness. But she had. She always did. Later that night, Damien sat in his study again, papers spread across the desk. He wasn't reading them. His mind was replaying that moment in the playroom, his daughter's small hands braiding Naomi's hair, the trust in her eyes, the ease in her laugh. Vanessa had never sat with the children like that. She had nannies, tutors, schedules. She loved to parade them like accessories, but never got down on the rug, never let their small fingers tangle in her hair. Naomi did. Naomi gave them something Vanessa never could, something Damien himself had failed to give them. A home. His hand clenched around his pen, the weight of shame pressing into him. He had let Vanessa's poison seep into every corner of their lives. And now his children turned to Naomi for the warmth their mother withheld and their father avoided. It should have angered him. It should have made him lash out, reclaim what was his. Instead, it broke him. Because deep down, he was grateful. Grateful that when he was too blind, too proud, too broken to give his children what they needed, Naomi had been there. And that gratitude scared him more than anything. Because gratitude could turn into something else. Something he couldn't afford to feel. The following Monday, Damien returned from work to find Vanessa already home. She was sprawled across the couch, sipping wine, scrolling through her phone. "You're early," she said without looking up. "So are you." Her lips curled. "Even I need a night off sometimes. Can't leave everything to your maid, can I?" The word dripped with disdain. Damien's jaw tightened. "Don't talk about her like that." Vanessa's eyes flicked up, sharp and mocking. "Oh? And why not? She's just help, Damien. Or has she become more than that to you?" Her smirk sliced at him, daring him to react. He didn't. He couldn't. He simply turned and walked past her, his silence louder than any retort. But inside, the truth seethed. Naomi was more than that. And Vanessa knew it. That night, Damien lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The city hummed outside, neon bleeding into the penthouse windows. Beside him, Vanessa slept soundly, her breath even, untroubled. How could she sleep after everything? After ripping his world apart? His fists clenched in the sheets. He wanted to wake her, to shout, to demand answers. But what would that prove? What would it change? Nothing. She had chosen her path. And he was left stumbling in the dark, resisting the truth he didn't want to face. That he had already lost her. That the marriage was over. That the only thing worth fighting for now was the children. And maybe, just maybe, the fragile sense of home Naomi had managed to hold together in the wreckage. But Damien wasn't ready to admit that. Not yet. So he lay there, wide-eyed, furious, broken, resisting, always resisting, until the city's gray dawn seeped back into the room, and another day began. The storm broke on a Wednesday afternoon. Damien had been in the middle of a tense negotiation with overseas partners when his phone buzzed. It was Naomi. She never called during working hours unless it was serious. He excused himself, stepping into the hallway. "Naomi." His voice was sharper than he meant it to be. Her reply came rushed, hushed, and edged with worry. "Mr. Cole, Damien, you need to come home. Vanessa, she brought him here. The children are in the living room with them right now." For a moment, Damien's pulse stopped. Then it roared back, hammering in his temples. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, he said, already striding for the elevator. The penthouse doors flew open, and Damien stormed inside. His children's laughter floated through the air, bright, innocent, unaware. It led him straight to the living room. And there he saw it. Vanessa sat elegantly on the sofa, a wine glass in hand, her smile sharp and deliberate. The twins were sprawled on the rug, playing with toy cars. His daughter perched on the coffee table, chattering happily. And beside her, beside his daughter, sat the man. The lover. Tall, smug, perfectly at ease in Damien's home, his arms stretched casually across the back of the sofa as if he belonged there. The sight made Damien's blood ignite. What the hell is this? His voice thundered through the room. The children froze. Vanessa's smile widened. The man merely raised an eyebrow. Damien, Vanessa purred, rising gracefully. You're home early. Get him out, Damien growled, pointing a trembling finger at the intruder. Now. The lover smirked. Relax. We're just spending some family time together. The kids seem to like me. Damien's vision tunneled. His daughter shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. The twins looked back and forth, confused, their toy cars abandoned. Don't you dare call this family, Damien spat. Vanessa stepped closer, her perfume suffocating. Maybe they deserve a man who's actually here, Damien. Not one who hides in boardrooms and comes home smelling of whiskey. His fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to strike something, break something, tear that smirk off the lover's face. But the children's wide eyes stopped him. Instead, he turned to them, his voice softer but trembling. Go upstairs. Now. They hesitated, looking to Vanessa. She waved them off carelessly. Go on, darlings. Mommy and Daddy need to talk. Naomi appeared in the hallway, her gaze steady, silently guiding the children upstairs. Their small footsteps faded, leaving the room heavy with tension. Damien turned back, his fury boiling. You bring him into my home, in front of my children? Vanessa's eyes glittered. Our home. And yes, they should know the truth sooner rather than later. What truth? Damien demanded. That their father is too weak to keep what's his. The lover chuckled lowly, rising to his feet. She's right, you know. Look at you, angry, desperate, clinging to a life that's already slipping away. Damien lunged forward, but Naomi's voice cut through like steel. Stop. She had reappeared at the edge of the room, her eyes blazing, her posture firm. For the first time, Damien saw her not as quiet support, but as something unyielding. The children don't deserve this, she said sharply, her voice steady despite the tension. Not the shouting. Not the games. Not the cruelty. Vanessa turned, scoffing. And what are you now, the house moral compass? Stay in your lane, Naomi. But Naomi didn't flinch. She met Vanessa's glare with unwavering calm. My lane is protecting these children. And right now, that means stopping you both. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Damien's chest heaved. His fury burned hot, but Naomi's words pierced through, forcing him to breathe, to think. Then Vanessa laughed, sharp and cruel. Oh, Damien. Is this what it's come to? Needing your maid to fight your battles. Her words hit like a whip. Damien stiffened, shame and pride colliding. He turned to Naomi, his tone harsh, defensive. Stay out of this, he snapped. This is my family. My fight. Naomi's eyes flickered, hurt flashing briefly before her mask steadied. She nodded once, quietly, and stepped back into the shadows. Vanessa smirked, satisfied. See? Even he knows where you belong. The lover chuckled again, adjusting his cufflinks. You're pathetic, Cole. You can't control your wife. You can't control your maid. And soon, you won't control your company either. Damien's rage erupted. He grabbed the man by the collar, shoving him toward the door. Get out. The lover raised his hands mockingly. Fine. But this isn't over. He smirked at Vanessa. Call me later. Damien threw him out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. He stood there, chest heaving, hands trembling. Vanessa poured herself another glass of wine. You can't win, Damien. You never could. Sooner or later, everyone sees through you. Then she swept past him, disappearing down the hall. The silence that followed was suffocating. Damien pressed his forehead against the door, trying to steady his breath, his pride, his sanity. He had never felt so powerless. Not in the boardroom. Not in the face of hostile takeovers. Never like this. And the worst part, the part that hollowed him, was that Naomi had been right. The children didn't deserve this. But he had shoved her away, the one person who dared to stand beside him. Later that night, Damien found Naomi in the kitchen, quietly rinsing dishes. She didn't look up when he entered. "About earlier," he began. She cut him off gently. "Don't apologize, Damien. You don't owe me that." He flinched at the use of his name. No title. No distance. "You were right," he admitted, voice low. "I let my pride. He trailed off, unable to finish. Naomi finally looked at him, her gaze steady. "Your children need you more than your pride does." The words were simple, but they lodged deep, harder than any insult Vanessa had ever thrown. Damien nodded slowly, but inside, the resistance still clawed at him. He wasn't ready to surrender. Not to Naomi's truth. Not to the reality of Vanessa's betrayal. Not yet. So he retreated again, into silence, into work, into denial. Because admitting the truth meant facing the wreckage of his life. And Damien Cole wasn't ready to break. Not yet. The morning after the confrontation burned like ash in Damien's chest. He had locked himself in his study, avoiding Vanessa's eyes, Naomi's gaze, and most of all, the questions flickering in his children's faces. Sleep hadn't come. He had dozed for minutes at a time, only to jolt awake with Vanessa's laughter echoing in his skull. By dawn, he sat at his desk staring blankly at a stack of reports. The numbers blurred, meaningless. His empire was steady for now, but his grip on it was loosening. He couldn't afford distraction. He knew this. But distraction had already taken him. "Daddy." The soft voice cut through the silence. Damien looked up to find his daughter standing in the doorway, clutching her stuffed bear to her chest. Her curls were mussed from sleep, her eyes heavy but searching. He forced a smile. "Sweetheart, it's early. Go back to bed." She shook her head, stepping inside. "I heard Mommy yelling last night." Damien's throat closed. "She said," the girl bit her lip, hesitating. "She said you don't love us anymore. That's why you're never home." The words hit harder than any boardroom ambush. Damien rose slowly, crossing to her, dropping to his knees so he could meet her eyes. "That's not true," he whispered, voice breaking. "I love you more than anything. You, your brothers, you're my whole world." "Then why don't you stay with us?" she asked, her innocence sharper than any accusation. Damien swallowed hard. He wanted to tell her everything, to spill the venom of Vanessa's betrayal, to explain why he was drowning in work and whiskey. But she was just a child. She shouldn't bear that weight. So he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I promise, sweetheart. I'll do better." She nestled against his chest, her tiny arms circling his neck. "Okay." The simplicity of her trust shattered him. When Naomi appeared quietly at the door, watching, he didn't push her away this time. He couldn't. Her presence was the only thing keeping him from collapsing entirely. At the office, things weren't better. Damien sat at the head of the boardroom table, his tie crooked, his eyes bloodshot. His executives exchanged uneasy glances as he fumbled through presentations, forgetting numbers he should have known by heart. One whispered, thinking he couldn't hear, "He's slipping." Another replied, "Vanessa's lover has connections." "You don't think?" The word sent fire through Damien's veins, but he said nothing. He was losing ground. He could feel it. Competitors circling. Investors questioning. His empire, his pride, beginning to wobble under his distracted hand. It was exactly what Vanessa wanted. and Damien was giving it to her. That night, he returned home late. The penthouse was quiet, the children asleep. Vanessa was gone, as usual. He poured himself a glass of bourbon and sat in the dark living room, staring at the city lights. The drink burned down his throat, but it didn't numb him. Nothing did anymore. Damien. He looked up. Naomi stood in the doorway, her night robe plain, her hair tied back. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were steady. "You need to stop this," she said quietly. He laughed bitterly. "Stop what? Drinking? Thinking? Breathing?" "Destroying yourself," she replied. Her words cut deeper than she knew. Damien set the glass down with a sharp clink. "What choice do I have? My wife has humiliated me, paraded her lover in front of my children, and is circling my company like a vulture. What am I supposed to do? Pretend it isn't happening?" "No," Naomi said firmly, stepping closer. "You fight. Not with anger. Not with pride. With clarity. For your children. For yourself. For the man you used to be." Damien's jaw tightened. "And what if I don't know who that man is anymore?" Naomi's gaze softened, but her voice remained steady. "Then let them remind you. The children. They still see him, Damien. Even when you don't." He turned away, swallowing hard. Silence stretched heavy between them. Finally he whispered, "I can't lose them." "You won't," Naomi said. "Not if you start being the father they need now. Not tomorrow. Not when Vanessa decides. Now." Her conviction pierced through his fog. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to lean into her strength. But pride still chained him. So he picked up his glass again, muttering, "You don't understand." Naomi's eyes darkened with something like disappointment. She turned and left without another word. The silence that followed was deafening. Days passed. Damien stumbled through them, half man, half shadow. The children began to withdraw, their laughter dimmer, their eyes wary. Vanessa came and went as she pleased, her cruelty sharpened, her lover's shadow looming larger. And Naomi grew distant. She still cared for the children with unwavering devotion, but her presence around Damien shifted, cooler, quieter. She had offered him strength, and he had pushed it away. Now, he felt the absence like a wound. He sat alone in his study one night, staring at the family photo on his desk. Vanessa's smile was radiant, his own stiff, the children bright and innocent. The photo mocked him now. The family was fractured. The marriage was dead. The empire was cracking. And all because he had resisted the truth. Because he had clung to pride instead of facing pain. Because he had shoved away the one person who still believed in him. Damien buried his face in his hands. For the first time in years, tears burned hot against his palms. And when the door creaked open, he didn't bother to hide them. Naomi stood there, silent. She didn't move, didn't speak. But Damien felt her presence, steady, grounding, unyielding. And for the first time, he let himself break. The clock ticked past midnight. Damien sat slumped in his chair, exhaustion pulling at him. Naomi remained in the room, seated quietly across from him, her gaze calm. Finally, he lifted his head, his voice raw. "Why haven't you given up on me?" Naomi's answer was simple. "Because your children haven't." The word struck something deep, something Damien could no longer resist. He leaned back, exhaling shakily. The war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But maybe, just maybe, he wasn't finished yet. The tension in Damien's life had reached a point where cracks became impossible to ignore. At the company headquarters, whispers no longer died down when he entered the room. They spread like smoke, seeping into every corridor. Quarterly reports showed unsettling trends. Smaller competitors were circling like vultures, and investors had begun to question his once unshakable judgment. But the corporate storm wasn't the one that drove Damien back into the suffocating silence of his penthouse. It was the storm inside his own walls. Vanessa had disappeared for 3 days. No explanations, no phone calls, not even a terse message. Just silence, and the children, left behind with wide eyes and anxious questions. Damien told himself he didn't care, that he was past the point of demanding answers from her. But when his youngest son tugged on his sleeve at dinner and asked, "Daddy, where's Mommy?" Damien's chest constricted so tightly he could barely swallow his food. Naomi had been the one to keep the household running smoothly in Vanessa's absence. She always had, but now the contrast was unbearable. She made sure the triplets were fed, helped them with homework, bathed them, tucked them in. Damien noticed how they clung to her, the way his daughter curled into Naomi's lap during story time, the way his sons fought over who got to sit closest to her at dinner. They didn't reach for Vanessa anymore. They reached for Naomi. And Damien couldn't help but notice the way Naomi met their needs without complaint, without question, with a steady patience that never cracked. That steadiness drew him in against his will. On the 4th night of Vanessa's absence, Damien came home late to find the dining table still set for 4. The children had clearly already eaten, plates with scraps and empty glasses, but his own place was untouched. Naomi emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "You missed dinner." Her tone wasn't sharp, wasn't accusing, but it landed with weight anyway. "I had a late meeting," Damien muttered, loosening his tie. "Your children asked for you." That landed harder than the first blow. Damien's jaw tightened. "I told you, Naomi, my work is important." "I know." She folded the towel neatly, her eyes steady on him. "But so are they." The silence between them was thick, the air charged. Damien finally sat, running a hand through his hair. "Where's Vanessa?" Naomi hesitated, then replied evenly, "I don't know." It was the truth. Vanessa hadn't called Naomi either. But the unspoken part, the part that said "you and I both know she's with him," hung between them. Damien's fist clenched around his fork. He didn't eat much that night. The next morning, he tried to beat the tension with action. He rose early, determined to take control of at least one part of his collapsing life. He would drive the children to school himself, something he hadn't done in years. But when he descended the stairs, he found Naomi already at the door with their coats zipped, their backpacks slung over their shoulders. She stood like a sentinel, a quiet figure of order in his chaos. "I'll drive them today," Damien said, reaching for his keys. Naomi raised a brow. "You have meetings." "I'll reschedule." The children's eyes flickered between them, confused by the unspoken tug-of-war. Finally, Naomi relented, handing Damien the car keys. "Fine. But don't let them be late." The drive was awkward. The children were unused to him in this role, and Damien was unused to their chatter without Vanessa to dominate the conversation. "Daddy," his daughter piped up, "can we have pancakes on Saturday?" Damien hesitated. "Sure." "With chocolate chips," his son added quickly. "Of course," Damien said, forcing a smile. They cheered, satisfied, and for the briefest moment Damien felt something unclench in his chest. But then the youngest asked, "Will Mommy be there?" The question stole his breath. Before he could answer, his daughter said softly, "I hope Naomi comes too." The words struck like lightning. Damien tightened his grip on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the road. Naomi wasn't just filling Vanessa's absence. She was replacing her. And Damien couldn't decide if that terrified him or comforted him. That night, Vanessa finally returned. She swept into the penthouse like a storm, perfume thick in the air, laughter still clinging to her lips. The children rushed toward her, hopeful, but she brushed past them with a casual, "Mommy's tired." Naomi froze at the kitchen counter, fury flickering in her eyes. Damien stood from the sofa, jaw clenched. "Where have you been?" he demanded. Vanessa smirked, kicking off her heels. Don't start. You left the children for 4 days. They had Naomi. The way she said it, careless, dismissive, almost mocking, made Damien's blood boil. Naomi's knuckles whitened around the dish towel she held. Vanessa caught the tension and smiled coldly. Don't look at me like that, Damien. You and I both know she's been playing house for years. Maybe you like it that way. Damien's face darkened. For once, Naomi spoke up, her voice steady. Don't you dare use them as pawns, Vanessa. The silence that followed was electric. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, but Damien's chest swelled with something he hadn't felt in a long time, pride. Naomi wasn't afraid of Vanessa. And she wasn't afraid to stand for the children. For him. And that realization was the beginning of a dangerous closeness neither of them could deny. The rain came like punishment. By dusk, the city skyline was a smear of gray, thunder rolling low and ominous, lightning cracking like a whip across the sky. Damien stood at the tall windows of his study, watching the storm lash against the glass. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one inside him. Vanessa had locked herself in their bedroom hours ago, scrolling through her phone with a smile that wasn't meant for him. The children, restless from a howling wind, had gathered in the living room with Naomi, who lit candles and told them stories to keep their minds away from the flickering power. Damien lingered in the doorway, watching. Naomi's voice was calm, steady, weaving tales of courage and adventure. The children hung on every word, their faces soft in the candlelight. The storm outside couldn't touch them while Naomi's presence wrapped them in warmth. It should have been Vanessa there. It should have been their mother. But it wasn't. It was Naomi. Always Naomi. When the lights flickered and went out entirely, the children gasped. Naomi drew them closer, pulling them into her lap. Damien finally stepped forward, his deep voice steady. It's all right. Daddy's here too. He sat beside them, reaching for his daughter's hand. She clutched it tightly. And in that moment, something shifted. Damien and Naomi weren't on opposite ends of a household anymore. They were side by side, a unit against the storm. Hours later, when the children finally fell asleep, Damien carried them upstairs, one by one. Naomi followed with blankets, tucking them in gently. Her movements were practiced, tender, full of a love that wasn't hers by blood but shone truer than Vanessa's ever had. When the last door clicked shut, Damien lingered in the hallway. Naomi stood across from him, candlelight softening the angles of her face. You're good with them, he said quietly. Her gaze flicked up. They're easy to love. The simplicity of the words pierced him. He swallowed, unsure what to say. Gratitude felt too small. Apologies felt too late. And yet the silence between them begged to be filled. So he murmured, "Thank you." Naomi tilted her head. For what? For being what they need. When I wasn't. Her expression softened, but she didn't step closer. They need you too, Damien. More than they know how to say. His chest tightened. He wanted to believe her, wanted to cling to the hope her words offered. But the storm inside him whispered otherwise. Still, he found himself studying her, really studying her. The curve of her jaw, the steadiness in her eyes, the way she carried strength without arrogance. She wasn't flashy, wasn't cruel, wasn't manipulative. She was real. And for the first time in years, Damien felt the dangerous pull of wanting something real. Later that night, the storm grew violent. A sharp crack split the sky, followed by the unmistakable sound of glass shattering downstairs. Naomi rushed from her room as Damien bolted down the hall. They met on the staircase, their eyes locking in the dim glow of candles. "Stay with the kids," Damien ordered. "No, I'm coming," Naomi insisted. They descended together. In the living room, a branch had torn through the tall window, rain pouring in, glass scattered across the floor. Damien cursed under his breath, moving to push the branch aside. Naomi grabbed a towel, trying to stem the flood of water. For minutes they worked in frantic silence, side by side, soaked by the storm's fury. Finally, when the immediate danger passed, they collapsed onto the couch, breathless, wet, exhausted. Damien ran a hand through his drenched hair, laughing bitterly. I used to close billion-dollar deals before breakfast. Now I can't even keep the rain out of my house. Naomi glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Maybe this is the storm you need. He turned to her, confused. She continued, her voice steady. You've built walls around yourself so high, Damien, even your children can't climb them. Sometimes, it takes a storm to bring them down. Her words sank deep, deeper than he wanted to admit. He stared at her, his heart pounding, not just from the storm, not just from exhaustion, but from the pull of something he hadn't felt in years. Connection. And for the briefest, most dangerous second, he wanted to close the space between them. But he didn't. Instead, he whispered, I don't know who I am without those walls. Naomi's gaze softened, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe it's time you found out. The silence that followed was louder than thunder. Damien looked away, unable to bear the weight of her eyes. But her words lingered, echoing in his chest long after the storm outside began to quiet. The storm had passed by morning, but its aftermath lingered in the penthouse. Rainwater stained the carpets, shards of glass still glittered under furniture, and the children buzzed with restless energy after a sleepless night. Naomi was already at work, cleaning and restoring order with quiet determination. Damien watched her from the kitchen doorway, a cup of black coffee cooling in his hands. She moved with purpose, her damp hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, her every action deliberate. He should have gone to the office. Investors were waiting, phone calls needed answering. But for the first time in years, he didn't care. He cared about this, about the fragile sense of peace Naomi's presence gave the house, about the way the children laughed as she coaxed them into sweeping up glass with little dustpans, turning a chore into a game. For the first time in years, Damien felt like he was standing in a home, not a battleground. And then Vanessa returned. She came in without warning, the sound of the door slamming hard enough to make the children jump. Her heels clicked sharply across the marble floor, her perfume filling the space like smoke. What the hell happened here? She demanded, eyes narrowing at the broken window, the damp carpets, the flicker of candles still scattered around. The storm, Damien replied flatly. Vanessa's gaze swept the room, landing on Naomi, who was crouched beside the children. Something sharp and ugly flashed across her face. Of course, she sneered. Naomi to the rescue. Again. The children shrank back, sensing the venom in their mother's tone. Naomi rose slowly, her eyes calm but steady. They were frightened, she said simply. I stayed with them. Vanessa's laugh was brittle. How noble. Tell me, Damien, is this what it's come to? You playing house with the help while I'm gone. The words cut deep, not just because of the accusation, but because of the children's wide, bewildered eyes. Vanessa, Damien warned, his voice low. But she wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her glare locked on Naomi. Don't think I don't see what you're doing. You think you can worm your way into my family, into my husband's good graces? You're nothing but a maid. Remember your place. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't lower her eyes or retreat. She stood tall, her voice calm but edged with steel. My place is with the children. Someone has to care for them. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Vanessa's face twisted with fury. Damien, are you really going to let her speak to me like that? Damien's jaw tightened. He looked at Naomi, her steady gaze, her quiet strength, and then at Vanessa, whose bitterness filled the room like poison. The choice wasn't simple. It was years of habit against a single moment of clarity. But clarity won. I won't let you speak to her like that, Damien said finally. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of finality. The children gasped softly. Vanessa's eyes widened, disbelief flickering before rage consumed her features. "You ungrateful bastard," she spat. "After everything I gave you." "What did you give me, Vanessa?" Damien snapped, his patience finally cracking. "A marriage built on appearances? A home filled with emptiness? Children you barely notice unless it suits your vanity." The words hung between them like thunder. Vanessa's face went pale, but Damien didn't stop. He gestured toward Naomi. "She's done more for them in one night than you have in months. And you hate her for it, not because she's wrong, but because she's right." The children stared, wide-eyed. Naomi remained silent, her expression unreadable, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. Vanessa's fury burned hotter. "You'll regret this, Damien. You think she cares about you? She's after your money, your status. She'll bleed you dry just like everyone else." Damien stepped forward, his voice dropping to a low growl. "No, Vanessa. The only one who's bled me dry is you." The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time, Vanessa seemed to falter, her confidence cracking. She turned sharply, snatching her purse from the table. "This isn't over," she hissed, before storming out the door. The slam of it echoed like final judgment. The children clung to Naomi, frightened by the fight. Damien watched as she soothed them, her touch gentle, her voice steady. She carried them upstairs, one by one, tucking them back into safety as if nothing had happened. When she returned, Damien was waiting in the living room, his shoulders heavy, his eyes dark. "You shouldn't have had to endure that," he said quietly. Naomi shook her head. "It's not about me." "Yes, it is." He stepped closer, his voice low, raw. "You've stood between her and the children more times than I can count. Between her and me. And you didn't have to. But you did." Naomi met his gaze, her own eyes steady. "Because someone had to." The simplicity of her answer shook him more than any storm could. He wanted to say more, wanted to reach for her, to confess the gratitude and the pull and the dangerous longing building inside him. But the children's footsteps echoed above, their voices breaking the moment. Naomi turned away, her face unreadable. And Damien knew that the storm between them was far from over. If you were Damien, standing between Vanessa's fury and Naomi's quiet strength, who would you defend? Would you protect the woman who betrayed you, or the one who has stood for your children? Share your answer in the comments. The morning after Vanessa's venom still lingered like smoke in the walls. Damien barely slept. He paced the study at dawn, staring at contracts he couldn't read, numbers that blurred into nonsense. For the first time in his career, he couldn't compartmentalize. Vanessa's accusations echoed in his skull. "She'll bleed you dry, just like everyone else." Damien didn't believe it. He couldn't. Naomi had been the anchor through storms, the one person who stood tall when everyone else faltered. And yet, the more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he knew about her. Who was Naomi, really? She had worked for his family for nearly 5 years. She had raised his children, shielded them, shielded him. But beyond that, where had she come from? Why did she stay year after year, despite Vanessa's cruelty and Damien's neglect? It gnawed at him until he couldn't ignore it. That afternoon, Damien skipped a meeting and returned home early. The penthouse was quieter than usual. The children were still at school. Vanessa had disappeared again. Naomi was in the laundry room, folding the children's clothes with calm precision. Damien lingered in the doorway, watching her work. She hummed softly under her breath, a tune he didn't recognize but found soothing all the same. Finally, he spoke. "Why do you stay?" Naomi froze, a folded shirt in her hands. She looked up slowly, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "You could work anywhere," Damien said, stepping inside. "You're educated. You're capable. You've put up with more from Vanessa than anyone should. So why? Why us?" Naomi's eyes flickered, guarded. Because the children need me. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. She turned back to the laundry, her movements clipped, deliberate. Damien crossed his arms, frustration simmering. You never talk about yourself, Naomi. Not once. I don't even know where you grew up, or if you have family, or he trailed off, his voice softening. I don't know who you are outside of this house. Naomi's hands stilled. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered, maybe that's for the best. Her tone closed the door on the conversation. Damien left the room unsettled, the questions gnawing at him harder than before. That evening, while searching for a report he'd misplaced, Damien found himself rifling through the storage closet near the study. Most of the boxes were full of old files, outdated ledgers, photographs of corporate events. But tucked away in the corner was a small worn leather bag. It wasn't his. Curious, Damien pulled it out. Inside were neatly folded clothes, a pair of shoes, a Bible with a cracked spine, and an envelope. He shouldn't have opened it. He knew that. But his hands moved before his conscience could stop them. The envelope contained a letter, the paper creased from being read too many times. The handwriting was careful but faded, the words etched with pain. My dearest Naomi, I wish I had more to give you. But life has stripped us bare, and all I can offer is this prayer, that you find a place where your strength is seen, not broken. Do not waste your light, my child. Even in the darkest rooms, it will guide someone home. There was no signature, no return address. Just those words, heavy with love and sorrow. Damien stared at the letter, his chest tight. Naomi had carried this with her, hidden it away like a relic. It wasn't just a note. It was a fragment of who she was. And suddenly he wanted, needed, to know the rest. When Naomi entered the study later that night, she froze at the sight of Damien sitting with the letter in his hands. Her face drained of color. Where did you get that? She asked, her voice sharp. It was in your bag, Damien admitted. I shouldn't have read it, but, he rose, holding it out. Naomi, what is this? Who wrote this to you? Naomi snatched the letter from his grasp, clutching it to her chest as if it were life itself. For the first time, Damien saw her mask crack, not just steady calm, but raw, unguarded pain. It doesn't matter, she whispered. It does, Damien pressed. It matters to me. Naomi shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. No, it matters to me. And I'm not ready for you to know. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Damien wanted to push, wanted to demand answers. But something in her expression, fragile, defensive, aching, stopped him. So instead he said softly, You've carried too much alone. Naomi's shoulders trembled, but she turned away. And I'll keep carrying it. Because some stories aren't meant to be told. She left the study without another word, the letter clutched in her hand. Damien remained frozen, his chest burning with questions and guilt. Naomi wasn't just the steady anchor he thought she was. She was a woman with scars, with a past carved deep into her bones. And Damien realized, with startling clarity, that he wanted to be the one to know those scars. To understand them. To carry them with her. But for now, Naomi had shut the door. And he had no choice but to wait. The house was silent the next evening, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of withheld words, of tension coiled too tightly to ignore. Damien had spent the day pretending to work, but his thoughts returned again and again to the letter. Naomi avoided him. She moved about the house with the same efficiency, the same calm, but her eyes never lingered on his. Her voice was softer with the children, but brittle with him. It gnawed at him. Not just because he wanted answers, but because he hated seeing her retreat behind walls he hadn't realized existed until now. By the third night, Damien couldn't bear it anymore. He found her on the balcony, long after midnight. The storm had passed, leaving the air cool, damp with the scent of rain. Naomi stood with her arms folded against the railing, her gaze fixed on the city lights. Damien stepped out quietly, shutting the glass door behind him. "You haven't been sleeping." Naomi didn't look at him. "Neither have you." He hesitated before stepping closer, giving her space but refusing to let her escape. "I crossed a line with that letter. I know that. But, Naomi, I want to understand you. Not because I'm your employer, not because I feel entitled. Because I can't keep pretending you're just," he broke off, struggling for words. "You're not just someone who works here. You're so much more, and I need to know who you are when you're not carrying everyone else." Finally, Naomi turned. Her face was weary, but her eyes burned with something sharper, fear maybe or defiance. "You want to know who I am?" she asked. "Fine. But don't think better of me when you do." Damien's chest tightened. "There's nothing you could say that would make me think less of you." Naomi studied him for a long moment. Then she took a shaky breath. "I grew up in Charleston," she began softly. "In a neighborhood people crossed the street to avoid. My mama raised me and my brother alone. She worked herself to the bone cleaning houses, not so different from what I do now." Damien remained silent, letting her speak. "I was 12 when she collapsed one day, scrubbing someone else's floors. The doctors said it was her heart. Too many years of overwork, too little care. She didn't last 6 months." Naomi's voice wavered. "And suddenly, it was just me and my brother. I was 15, he was 10. I dropped out of school to keep us afloat. Cleaned houses, babysat, whatever I could do. Every dollar was survival." Damien's hands curled into fists at his sides. He could see it, Naomi younger, smaller, carrying the weight of a world too heavy for her. "By the time I turned 21, she continued, my brother got caught up with the wrong people. Drugs. Gang. I begged him to stop, but he wouldn't listen. One night, they brought him home, shot in the street." Her voice cracked, the words slipping out like shards of glass. Damien's throat tightened. "Naomi." She shook her head, blinking back tears. "After that, I promised myself I'd never stop fighting. I'd never let another child feel abandoned the way we did. So when I met your children, Damien, broken, lonely, desperate for love, I couldn't leave. Even when Vanessa tried to make me. Even when you ignored me. Because they needed someone. And I knew what it was to be that child left with no one." The silence between them was thick with unspoken emotion. Damien's chest ached, every word of hers carving into him. Naomi turned away, her shoulders trembling. "So there's your truth. I'm not some saint. I'm just someone who refused to walk away when I could have. Because I know what it costs." Damien stepped closer, his voice raw. "Naomi, you've carried all of that alone. All these years, and you still gave more love than anyone else in this house. Don't ever tell me you're not more than enough." Her breath hitched, and she shook her head. "Don't say that." "Why not?" "Because it's not safe. For me. For you. For the children." Damien's hand lifted instinctively, hovering inches from her arm before dropping. "Naomi, what you've been through doesn't make you less. It makes you stronger than anyone I've ever known. Stronger than me." Her eyes searched his face, as though testing the truth of his words. For a moment, neither moved. The air between them thrummed with tension, not the sharp hostility of the past, but the fragile pull of two people standing at the edge of something dangerous, something real. Naomi turned back to the city lights, her voice a whisper. "You can't save me, Damien. I already saved myself." "And maybe," he said quietly, "it's my turn to stand beside you." Naomi's lips parted, but no words came. The silence stretched, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. That night, Damien lay awake long after Naomi retreated to her room. Her story replayed in his mind, her sacrifices, her scars, the unyielding strength that had carried her here. He saw her not just as the woman who nurtured his children, but as someone forged in fire, who still chose compassion despite every reason not to. And he realized, with startling clarity, that Naomi wasn't just saving his children. She was saving him. For the first time in years, Damien couldn't hide behind his work. He sat in his office the following morning, staring at contracts and numbers that suddenly felt meaningless. Naomi's confession the night before kept echoing in his mind, her sacrifices, her scars, her strength. He had spent so long telling himself he didn't need anyone, that his money, his empire, his cold precision could shield him from pain. But Naomi had blown a hole through that lie. And for the first time, Damien wondered, what would happen if he told his truth? By evening, he found her again, this time in the children's room. She was reading them a story, her voice soft and melodic, the triplets clustered around her in their pajamas. Damien lingered in the doorway, watching as their eyes grew heavy, their little heads nodding. When Naomi gently tucked them in and kissed each forehead, Damien's chest tightened. She wasn't their mother. But in every way that mattered, she was. As Naomi stepped into the hallway, Damien stopped her. "Can we talk?" Her eyes searched his face, wary but calm. "About what?" "About me." They ended up in the study, the room dim with only the glow of a desk lamp. Damien stood by the shelves, his hands restless at his sides. Naomi sat on the armchair, her posture straight, waiting. "I listened to you last night," Damien began, his voice low. "And I realized I've never given you the same. I've never let you see me, not really. So if you'll let me, I want to try." Naomi tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "I'm listening." Damien exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. "People think I was born into wealth. That I grew up with everything handed to me. That's the story the world believes. But the truth," he paused, swallowing hard. "The truth is, my father made his money by tearing people down. He was ruthless, cold, cruel. And he taught me to be the same. My mother, she was fragile. Too fragile for the world he built around us. She drank herself numb until she didn't wake up one morning." Naomi's face softened, but she said nothing. "I was 16, Damien continued, his voice rough. And my father's response was, 'Get up. Don't waste time grieving. Weakness will bury you faster than any coffin.'" He laughed bitterly. "So I buried everything. The pain, the fear, the anger. I learned to be his son, his soldier. By 21, I had clawed my way into his company. By 25, I was CEO. People called me brilliant, ruthless, unstoppable. But the truth is, I was just empty. A mirror of him." Naomi's eyes glistened, but she stayed silent, letting him unravel. "Then I met Vanessa," Damien said, his tone hollow. "She was beautiful, ambitious, sharp. She knew exactly what to say to make me feel alive. For the first time, I thought I'd found someone who saw me. But she didn't want me. She wanted the empire, the image. And I was too blind, too desperate to notice." His fists clenched, his voice breaking. "So I gave her everything. My name, my fortune, my loyalty. And in return, she hollowed me out even further. Every smile was calculated, every touch a performance. Until one day, I realized I was nothing more than my father again. Cold, cruel, empty. Watching my children drift away while the woman beside me poisoned the air we breathed." Damien turned away, his shoulders trembling. "That's who I am, Naomi. A man who destroys what he touches. A man who let his children grow up motherless even while their mother was still alive. A man who," he broke off, his voice cracking. Naomi rose quietly and crossed the room. She didn't speak. She didn't lecture. She simply laid a hand on his arm, gentle, steady. Damien closed his eyes, the touch undoing him. I don't want to be him anymore, he whispered. But I don't know how to stop. Naomi's voice was soft, almost like a prayer. By choosing differently. Every day. By seeing your children. By seeing yourself. By not letting the past dictate the future. He opened his eyes, meeting hers. There was no pity in her gaze, no judgment. Only compassion. Only truth. Do you really think I can change? He asked, his voice raw. Naomi nodded once. I don't just think it. I've seen it. You may not realize it, Damien, but you already have. You're not the man you were when I first walked into this house. You're not your father. Her certainty cracked something inside him. For the first time in years, Damien felt the faintest spark of hope flicker in the ashes of his soul. And he realized, with a clarity that terrified him, that Naomi wasn't just his children's savior. She was his. Later that night, as Naomi left the study, Damien whispered, "Thank you." She paused at the door, her silhouette framed by the dim light. For what? For giving me back pieces of myself I thought were gone. Naomi's lips curved in the faintest, saddest smile. I didn't give them back. They were always there. You just needed someone to remind you. And then she was gone, leaving Damien standing in the quiet room, his heart heavier and lighter all at once. The days following their confessions were different. The air in the penthouse had shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Damien noticed it first in the children. The triplets clung to Naomi with their usual adoration, but now when Damien walked into the room, they didn't shrink back or look for escape. They lingered. They even smiled. It was small, fragile progress, but to Damien it felt monumental. One Saturday morning, the children begged Naomi to take them to the park. Damien overheard their pleas, expecting her to gently deflect. Vanessa rarely allowed such outings without her approval. But Naomi surprised him. "Ask your father," she said simply, looking at Damien over the breakfast table. The triplets froze, wide-eyed. Asking him had never been an option. Damien cleared his throat, uneasy. The park. 3 little voices answered at once, "Please, Daddy." It wasn't the word daddy that broke him, it was the hope in their eyes. Hope that he might finally say yes. And for once, Damien did. The park was alive with laughter and sunlight, a contrast to the penthouse's sterile walls. Naomi laid out a blanket under a tree while the triplets ran toward the swings, their squeals ringing across the air. Damien stood awkwardly at first, his suit jacket slung over one arm, unsure what to do with himself. Naomi glanced at him, amusement flickering in her eyes. "You don't have to stand there like a bodyguard, you know. They just want you to play." "Play," Damien repeated, as if it were a foreign word. Naomi smirked. "Yes. You remember what that is, don't you?" He gave her a look, but her teasing softened something inside him. With a sigh, he loosened his tie, rolled up his sleeves, and walked toward the swings. The children squealed with delight as he pushed them, their laughter infectious. Naomi watched from the blanket, her smile quiet but radiant. Damien hadn't laughed in years, but he did then, deep, unguarded laughter as one of the swings nearly knocked him backward. The triplets howled, and Damien joined them, shaking his head at their mischief. For Naomi, the sight was almost surreal. This wasn't the cold, controlled CEO. This was a father rediscovering his children. Later, they returned to the blanket, exhausted and sweaty. Naomi passed out sandwiches she'd packed, while Damien sat cross-legged, watching the children chatter between bites. One of the girls tugged at Naomi's sleeve. "Tell us a story." Naomi chuckled. "I already told you 3 yesterday." "Please," the children chorused. Naomi gave Damien a sidelong glance. "What do you think? Should I?" He arched a brow. "You always give in to them this easily." Her lips curved. "Always." So she told them a story, about a brave lion who protected 3 little cubs in the wild. Her voice was animated, her expressions playful, and the triplets hung on every word. But Damien noticed something else. The children weren't just watching Naomi, they were watching him, waiting to see if he was listening too. So Damien leaned in, nodding at all the right parts, even gasping dramatically when the lion roared. The triplets burst into laughter, and Naomi's eyes sparkled. For the first time, it felt like a family. On the drive home, the children dozed off in the back seat, their heads leaning against one another. Damien glanced in the rearview mirror, his chest tightening at the sight. "They trust you," Naomi said quietly from the passenger seat. Damien's hands tightened on the wheel. "They trust you." Naomi shook her head. "No, Damien. Today they trusted you. Don't dismiss that." He didn't respond, but her words stayed with him all the way home. That evening, the triplets sprawled in the living room, too tired to move. Naomi sat on the rug with them, her back against the couch. Damien watched from the armchair, a glass of water in hand. One of the children climbed into Naomi's lap, another curled against her side. She stroked their hair, humming softly. "You should sit with them," Naomi said suddenly, glancing at Damien. He blinked. "What?" "They want you close. They just don't know how to ask yet." Damien hesitated, then set the glass aside. Slowly, awkwardly, he lowered himself onto the rug beside them. The triplets stirred, blinking sleepily. One reached for his hand. Damien froze, then let the tiny fingers curl around his. Naomi smiled faintly. "See." Damien's throat tightened. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed this simple closeness, unguarded affection. And sitting there, shoulder to shoulder with Naomi, he felt something stir that terrified him and soothed him all at once. Not lust. Not obligation. Something far more dangerous. Belonging. Monday morning started with the usual chaos. The triplets running late, cereal spilling on the counter, Vanessa nowhere to be found. Damien had a meeting downtown, but for once, didn't rush out the door. Instead, he helped tie a crooked shoelace, packed an extra snack, and even managed a kiss on each small forehead before Naomi ushered the kids to the waiting car. When the door shut, the penthouse grew quiet again. Damien stood by the window, staring at the skyline, lost in thought. Naomi's voice drew him back. "You didn't have to stay this morning," she said gently, gathering plates. "I wanted to," Damien replied, surprising even himself. Naomi tilted her head, studying him. "That's new." He smirked faintly. "Maybe I'm capable of surprises." That afternoon, Damien canceled his usual driver and asked Naomi to join him downtown. "Me?" she asked, frowning as she set aside a basket of laundry. "Yes, you. I don't want an assistant or a consultant, I want you." Naomi hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Damien, I'm not." "You're not just anything," he interrupted. His tone softened. "Just come. Please." Reluctantly, she agreed. The car ride was quiet at first, Naomi's hands folded in her lap. But when the city streets opened into gleaming skyscrapers, Damien noticed her eyes widen slightly, taking in the towers of glass and steel. "You've worked for me all these years," Damien said, "but you've never seen where it all happens." "Didn't think I was invited," Naomi murmured. "You weren't," Damien admitted. "But that was my mistake." He brought her to his office tower, a pristine monument of glass and marble. Naomi followed him into the top-floor boardroom, where the walls were lined with screens and the city sprawled beneath them. Naomi crossed her arms, unimpressed. "So this is the empire?" Damien chuckled. "You sound underwhelmed." She arched a brow. "It's just walls and windows. Don't mistake that for power." Her words disarmed him. Everyone else who entered this room treated it like a throne. Naomi treated it like nothing. For once, Damien didn't feel the need to defend it. Instead, he said, "Maybe you're right." Her eyes softened, as though she hadn't expected him to agree. Later, he brought her to lunch at a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. For Naomi, the luxury was overwhelming: the polished cutlery, the wine glasses, the waiters who bowed low. But she hid her discomfort behind calm composure. Damien noticed. "You hate it," he said flatly. Naomi blinked. "I don't hate it. It's just not me." He leaned back, studying her. "Then tell me, what is you?" Naomi hesitated, then smiled faintly. A plate of fried chicken on a back porch. A cup of sweet tea. Kids playing tag until the streetlights come on. That's my world. Not crystal chandeliers and $12 sparkling water. Damien found himself smiling, truly smiling. "Then maybe I need to see your world." Her eyes met his, a spark of challenge there. "Are you sure you'd survive it?" "Try me." The next evening, Naomi kept her promise. She invited Damien to her side of the city, the part he never drove through unless his car windows were tinted and the doors locked. They walked down cracked sidewalks lined with corner stores and fading murals. Children chased each other barefoot, neighbors greeted Naomi warmly, and for the first time in his life, Damien felt invisible. Not feared, not revered, just another man walking the street. Naomi took him to a tiny diner where the waitress knew her by name. They ate fried chicken and collard greens on paper plates, and Damien realized he hadn't enjoyed a meal this much in years. "This," Naomi said, sipping sweet tea, "is real. People here don't care how much money you have. They care if you show up. If you're present. If you're family." Damien nodded slowly. "I don't know if I'd fit." Naomi's gaze softened. "You'd learn." On the way back, Damien caught her hand as they crossed a busy street, guiding her through the crowd. It wasn't planned, it wasn't conscious, it was instinct. But Naomi didn't pull away. For a few steps, they walked hand in hand, and something inside Damien shifted. It wasn't about wealth or status or even gratitude. It was about trust. Back at the penthouse, the triplets bombarded them with questions. "Where did you go? Did you get us food? Did you have fun?" Naomi laughed, brushing their hair back. "We had chicken. Next time, maybe you'll come too." The children pouted, but their eyes flicked toward Damien, waiting to see if he'd agree. And for once, Damien didn't hesitate. "Next time we'll all go." The triplets cheered, wrapping themselves around his legs. Naomi's eyes met his over their heads, her expression unreadable, but her smile lingered. For Damien, it felt like the beginning of something dangerous. Something fragile. Something real. The night after their visit to Naomi's neighborhood, Damien couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the sound of her laughter in the diner, the way her hand felt in his, the glow in the children's eyes when he promised another outing. It was new. It was terrifying. The woman he was beginning to want wasn't glamorous or calculating like Vanessa. She wasn't ambitious in the way society admired. She was Naomi. Simple. Steady. Unyieldingly real. And that scared him more than losing his fortune ever had. A storm rolled in that weekend, rain lashing against the penthouse windows. The triplets were restless, cooped up indoors, bouncing from one toy to the next. Naomi finally corralled them into the living room with pillows and blankets, declaring it movie night. Damien wandered in, surprised to find the room transformed into a fortress of cushions. The triplets squealed, demanding he join. At first, he stood at the edge, hands in his pockets. But Naomi patted the spot beside her. "Come on. It won't kill you." So Damien lowered himself onto the floor, awkward in the sea of pillows. One of the boys immediately climbed into his lap, clutching a stuffed bear. Damien froze, but then slowly wrapped an arm around the small body. The child nestled closer, content. Something inside Damien cracked open. The movie played, but Damien barely noticed. He was too busy watching the triplets' reactions, the way their faces lit up at funny scenes, the way they buried their eyes during scary ones. Naomi soothed them with gentle words, her voice low and warm. At some point, Naomi leaned against him, her shoulder brushing his. Damien's breath caught. It was nothing, barely a touch. But to him, it was everything. They stayed that way until the movie ended and the triplets fell asleep in a pile of blankets. Damien carefully lifted one, then another, carrying them to their rooms. When he returned, Naomi was tidying the cushions, her hair falling loose around her face. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For showing up," Naomi replied, meeting his eyes. "That's all they ever wanted." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He moved closer, standing only a step away. "And what about you? What do you want, Naomi?" Her breath caught. For the first time, her composure wavered. I don't know." "Yes, you do." His voice was low, insistent. Naomi's eyes flicked to his lips, then away. "Damien, we shouldn't." But Damien reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch lingered, his fingers trailing against her cheek. Naomi closed her eyes, torn between resistance and surrender. "I'm not asking what we should do," Damien whispered. "I'm asking what you want." Naomi's eyes opened, glistening. I want peace. I want a family that isn't broken. I want the kids to feel safe. And," she faltered, "I want to feel seen." Damien's chest tightened. "Then look at me. Because I see you, Naomi. I see you more than anyone else ever has." Her resolve crumbled. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest. Damien wrapped his arms around her, holding her as the storm raged outside. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. But it was more intimate than anything he'd felt in years. The next morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the city washed and bright. Damien found Naomi in the kitchen, making breakfast while the triplets chattered at the table. She glanced up, their eyes meeting briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the night before. Something had shifted. A line had been crossed, not physically, but emotionally. And both of them knew there was no going back. The children tugged on Damien's sleeve, begging him to sit with them. He did, surprising himself again. Naomi served plates, her smile soft, her hands brushing his as she set down his coffee. For a moment, they looked like any ordinary family. And for Damien, that illusion was both terrifying and intoxicating. Later that day, when the children napped, Naomi stepped onto the balcony for air. Damien followed, drawn to her presence. "You've changed," she said quietly, staring out at the skyline. Damien stood beside her. "Or maybe I'm just remembering who I was before I forgot." Naomi turned to him, her expression searching. "What happens when Vanessa comes back?" The name hit like a knife. Damien clenched his jaw. She made her choice. Naomi shook her head. "She'll try to undo it. Women like her don't let go of power so easily." "And what about you?" Damien asked, voice low. "If she does come back, what do you want me to choose?" Naomi hesitated, her eyes glistening in the fading light. "Choose what's right for the kids." Damien stepped closer. "And if what's right for them is also what's right for me?" Naomi's breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't answer, but she didn't move away either. For Damien, that silence was louder than any confession. That night, after the children were asleep, Damien found Naomi in the study, curled on the couch with a book. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, before finally speaking. "You've become everything I didn't know I needed," he said quietly. Naomi looked up, startled. "Damien." I mean it, he pressed. You saved me when I was too blind to see I needed saving. And now every day you keep saving me. Not with grand gestures, but with little things, your laughter, your patience, your strength. Her eyes shimmered. Damien, don't. He crossed the room, lowering himself onto the couch beside her. His hand hovered, then settled gently over hers. Tell me to stop, and I will, he whispered. Naomi's lips parted, but no words came. She didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she let her head rest on his shoulder. And for Damien, that was enough. Not victory. Not conquest. But belonging. Damien and Naomi's bond has moved beyond duty and gratitude into something deeper. Do you think love grows strongest in storms, or in the quiet moments after? Share your thoughts in the comments. The peace in Damien's penthouse didn't last. Peace never does. The whispers started small, rumors drifting through his company's halls, whispers of financial instability, of confidential documents leaked to competitors. At first, Damien brushed them off. But when contracts began slipping through his fingers and investors grew nervous, he realized someone was pulling strings. And then came the headline. CEO Damien Holt's fortune tumbles. Inside sources point to domestic turmoil. The article was vicious, dragging not only his business but his personal life into the spotlight. The mention of Naomi, his maid-turned-caretaker, was the final blow. The children heard whispers at school. Damien fielded suspicious looks from board members. Naomi, meanwhile, tried to stay invisible, but the weight of judgment pressed harder each day. One night, Damien stormed into the penthouse, his jaw clenched, papers crumpled in his fist. Naomi was tucking the triplets into bed when she heard the door slam. She stepped into the living room cautiously. Damien. He spun on her, eyes blazing. Did you tell anyone? About us? About this family? Naomi froze, stunned. What? No, of course not. Then how do they know? Damien's voice was sharp, edged with panic. Confidential files, private details, things only someone close could have leaked. Naomi's chest tightened. You think I did this? I don't know. His voice cracked. But the timing, Naomi, everything's collapsing and I can't. He trailed off, unable to finish. Her hands trembled, hurt flashing in her eyes. After everything, after all we've been through, you think I'd betray you? Damien raked a hand through his hair, pacing. I can't think straight. I don't know who to trust anymore. Naomi's voice dropped to a whisper. You don't trust me. Silence fell. Damien didn't deny it. That silence cut deeper than words ever could. The triplets, sensing the tension, peeked from their bedroom door. Naomi noticed and forced a calm smile, ushering them back inside. But when she returned, her own mask cracked. I've stood by you, Damien. I've defended you. I've protected your children as if they were my own. And yet, one headline, and suddenly I'm the enemy. Damien's eyes softened, regret flickering, but pride and fear held him back. I need answers. Naomi's chest ached. Then maybe you should find them without me. She turned, retreating down the hall, leaving Damien alone with his doubt. The next morning, Naomi was quiet, her eyes avoiding his as she prepared the children for school. The warmth that once filled the penthouse had chilled. Damien felt it with every step, but he couldn't bring himself to bridge the gap. At work, his day grew worse. A leaked document, his personal schedule, complete with the children's names, landed in a rival's hands. Panic surged. If someone was targeting his business and his family, it was more dangerous than he feared. When Damien arrived home, Naomi was waiting, her face pale. Vanessa was here. The words dropped like a bomb. Damien stiffened. What? She showed up while you were gone. She wanted to see the kids. Naomi's hands clenched. I didn't let her in. But Damien, she knows things. She hinted about your meetings, your finances. Things I've never known. Damien's stomach turned. Vanessa. Of course. But instead of relief that Naomi wasn't the leak, guilt consumed him. He had doubted her. Hurt her. And worse, Vanessa's reappearance meant the storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. That night, Damien sat alone in the study, staring at a photo of his children on the desk. His empire was crumbling, his heart was in turmoil, and the woman he'd begun to trust now avoided his gaze. When Naomi passed the doorway, he called out, "Naomi." She paused, waiting. "I was wrong." His voice was rough. "I let fear blind me. I shouldn't have doubted you." Her eyes shimmered, but her expression stayed guarded. "Words are easy, Damien. Trust is harder." And she walked away, leaving him drowning in silence. The next few days were a blur. The triplets grew restless, sensing the distance between Naomi and Damien. Vanessa's shadow lingered, poisoning every room with unspoken dread. Then came the shatter. Damien returned home early to find Naomi on the balcony with the children, their laughter carrying into the night air. For a brief moment, he saw what he had nearly lost, and his chest tightened with longing. But when he stepped closer, Vanessa appeared in the doorway, her voice like poison. "Well, isn't this cozy?" Naomi froze, pulling the children close. Damien stiffened, fury in his veins. Vanessa smirked, stepping inside as though she still belonged. "You replaced me with her? A maid? Do you know what the world is saying about you, Damien? Do you know how pathetic this looks?" Naomi's face paled, but she didn't move. The children shrank behind her. Damien's voice was low, lethal. "Get out." Vanessa's smirk faltered, but only for a second. "You'll come crawling back. You always do." She turned and left, slamming the door behind her. But the damage was done. The children were shaken, Naomi was trembling, and Damien knew his world had officially shattered. The morning after Vanessa's intrusion, the penthouse felt heavier than ever. Naomi moved through the kitchen like a ghost, her shoulders tense, her eyes avoiding Damien's. The triplets picked at their breakfast, unusually quiet, their laughter muted. Damien wanted to fix it, say something, do something, but every word felt inadequate. He had let Vanessa slip back into their lives, and now her venom was spreading. At the office, the storm worsened. Vanessa's lover, Paul, appeared in glossy magazines flaunting the luxury Damien had once provided. A yacht in Ibiza, a villa in France. Headlines screamed about Damien's downfall, contrasting Paul's meteoric rise. What stung most wasn't the loss of wealth. It was that Vanessa stood beside Paul in every photo, radiant, triumphant. Every glance from his colleagues felt like pity. Every whisper was humiliation. When Damien returned home that night, Naomi was waiting in the living room, her face pale but resolute. She came again. Damien froze. "Vanessa." Naomi nodded. She stood outside, shouting. The kids heard everything. She said she's their real mother, and no one can replace her. The words sliced through him. "And the children?" he asked, voice low. "They were terrified," Naomi whispered. "One of them asked me if you'd choose her over us." The ache in Damien's chest was unbearable. "I would never." Naomi cut him off. "You need to make this stop, Damien. For their sake." His jaw tightened. "I will." But Vanessa wasn't done. 2 days later, a tabloid ran photos of Damien leaving the penthouse with Naomi and the children. The headline was brutal. From millionaire mogul to domestic scandal, Damien Holt replaces wife with the help. The children saw the photos at school. By the time Naomi picked them up, they were in tears. "Is it true, Miss Naomi?" One of the girls sobbed. "Are you stealing Daddy from Mommy?" The question gutted her. She pulled them close, soothing them as best she could, but inside she was breaking. That evening, she confronted Damien. "This can't go on," Naomi said, her voice trembling. "They're children, Damien. They shouldn't be caught in this war." Damien's hands clenched at his sides. "I'll destroy Vanessa for this." "No," Naomi snapped, surprising him. "This isn't about revenge. It's about protecting them. But I don't think you see that anymore." Her words stung. "Naomi, I don't know if I can keep doing this," she whispered. "I can't watch them suffer because of your war with her." Damien's chest tightened. "Are you saying you'll leave?" Naomi's silence was answer enough. That night, the penthouse felt emptier than ever. Damien sat alone in the darkened study, the city lights flickering outside. He thought about Naomi's words, about the children's tears, about Vanessa's smirk. He was losing everything. His empire, his family, Naomi. And it was all his fault. The breaking point came 3 days later. Damien arrived home to find the triplets huddled in their room, eyes wide with fear. Naomi sat beside them, her face pale. "She came again," Naomi whispered. But this time, she got in. She walked through the door like she owned the place. She told the children you would always be hers, no matter what. Damien's blood boiled. "Where is she now?" "I made her leave," Naomi said. "But the damage is done. The kids don't know what to believe anymore." Damien turned, ready to storm out and confront Vanessa, but Naomi grabbed his arm. "Stop," she pleaded. "You can't keep fighting her like this. It's tearing everyone apart." Damien's voice cracked with fury and despair. "What do you want me to do, Naomi? Let her win? Let her take everything?" Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "I want you to protect them. That's all I've ever wanted." Damien froze, the weight of her words crushing him. Protect them. Not his pride, not his empire, just the children. And in that moment, he realized he had been fighting the wrong battle all along. But Naomi's next words shattered him. "Until you can do that, Damien, I think I need to step back." He stared at her, disbelief coursing through him. "Step back." Her voice broke. "From you. From this house. I love those children, but I can't keep standing in a crossfire where I'm always the target. Not when you still let her in." Damien's throat closed. "Naomi, please." But she shook her head, tears spilling. "I'm sorry." And with that she walked away, leaving him standing in the ruins of everything he'd begun to believe in. That night, Damien sat in the children's room as they slept, their small hands curled against their cheeks. He whispered to them, his voice raw. "I'll fix this. I promise. I'll fix it for you. Even if it costs me everything." But as the city raged outside and the shadows of Vanessa's laughter lingered in his ears, Damien wasn't sure if his promise meant anything anymore. Because Naomi was gone. The penthouse was silent. Not the soft silence of peace, but the hollow emptiness of absence. Naomi's presence was gone. Her laughter, her footsteps, her steadying voice, all replaced by a void that gnawed at Damien's chest. The triplets felt it too. They moped around the apartment, refusing their meals, asking when Miss Naomi would come back. Damien had no answers. He tried to distract them with toys, outings, sweets, but nothing worked. Naomi wasn't just a caretaker, she was the heart that had kept them all together. And now that heart was missing. At work, Damien's empire teetered on collapse. Vanessa and Paul flaunted their stolen wealth, undercutting him at every turn. Investors fled. The board whispered about forcing him out. One afternoon, Damien sat in his office, the city sprawling beneath him, when his lawyer walked in. "You're hemorrhaging assets," the man said bluntly. "If this continues, you'll lose the company." Damien didn't flinch. He'd heard it all before. But what cut him wasn't the threat of bankruptcy. It was the image of Naomi's eyes when she said she couldn't stay. He had lost her trust. Worse, he had proven her right. That night, Damien returned home late to find Vanessa waiting in the lobby. She leaned against the marble wall, dressed to kill, her smile sharp as a blade. Well, well. Look who's all alone now. Damien's jaw tightened. Get out of my way. Vanessa's laugh was low, mocking. You thought you could replace me with her? A maid? Look where it got you, your company in ruins, your children confused, your little charity case gone. Rage burned in Damien's chest, but deeper than rage was shame. Because in her twisted way, Vanessa was right. He had let everything crumble. I'll take the kids, Damien, she whispered, her voice venomous. They'll see who really loves them. Not some stranger who walked in off the street. Damien's fists clenched, but he forced himself to walk past her. Her laughter echoed behind him, searing into his skin. In the days that followed, Damien spiraled. He stopped shaving, his suits hung loose, his eyes darkened with sleepless nights. He barely ate. He drank too much. He yelled at the triplets once, just once, but the way they flinched broke him so deeply that he locked himself in his study for hours, fists pounding against the desk until his knuckles bled. The children whispered to each other, asking when Naomi would return. One night, one of them crept into his room and asked quietly, Daddy, did Miss Naomi stop loving us? Damien's heart shattered. No, he whispered, pulling the child close. She loves you more than anything. She just can't be here right now. The child's small voice quivered. But why did you make her leave? Damien couldn't answer. He just held his son, tears burning his eyes, realizing the truth. His pride, his blindness, his rage, they hadn't just cost him Naomi. They had hurt his children too. And for the first time, Damien admitted aloud what he had refused to face. I failed you, he whispered. I failed all of you. The next morning, Damien looked at himself in the mirror. The man staring back was hollow, broken, unrecognizable. For years, he had defined himself by power, wealth, and control. Now all of it was slipping through his fingers. But as he studied his reflection, another truth emerged. Maybe this wasn't punishment. Maybe it was a chance. A chance to strip away the lies, the pride, the empire, and find out who he really was. The children deserved more than a man clinging to his pride. Naomi deserved more than a man too blind to see her worth. And Damien deserved the chance to become someone who could protect them, love them, and never let them doubt again. He clenched his fists, bloodied but steady. I'll rise from this, he vowed. Not for me. For them. The first step was swallowing his pride. Damien began reaching out. To allies he had alienated, to friends he had ignored. Slowly, painfully, he started rebuilding. But it wasn't enough. Naomi's absence still hollowed the penthouse. Every laugh of the children reminded him of her. Every meal felt incomplete without her presence. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Damien sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. His handwriting was messy, his words clumsy, but they were raw. Naomi. I was blind. I let fear and pride turn me against the one person who saved me and my children. You deserved trust, and I gave you suspicion. You deserved love, and I gave you doubt. You deserved peace, and I brought you war. If you never forgive me, I'll understand. But know this, I will spend every day proving that I see you. That I choose you. That I need you, not as a savior, not as a caretaker, but as the woman who taught me what family means. He folded the letter but didn't send it. He wasn't ready. Not yet. Because words alone couldn't fix what he had broken. That night, Damien stood on the balcony, the city sprawling beneath him. For the first time, he didn't see a kingdom he had built or an empire slipping away. He saw a battlefield. And this time, He knew the war wasn't against Vanessa. It was against himself. Damien has hit rock bottom. Admitting his pride and fear cost him everything. Do you think broken trust can ever be fully healed, or only endured? Share your thoughts in the comments. Damien woke before dawn. For weeks, he had dragged himself out of bed in silence, carrying the weight of Naomi's absence and the sting of betrayal that Vanessa and Paul had inflicted. But this morning was different. The exhaustion was still there, the ache in his chest hadn't dulled, but there was something else threading through the fog of defeat. Resolve. He pulled on his suit, one of the last that still fit him properly, and stood in front of the mirror. His reflection was thinner, worn down, his hair touched with gray he hadn't noticed before. But his eyes were steady for the first time in months. The children deserved a father who fought. Naomi deserved a man who chose humility over pride. And Damien needed to reclaim the part of himself that hadn't died with his marriage. Today he would begin. At the office, whispers followed him. Employees glanced at him as though they were watching a ghost. Paul had taken over much of the decision-making, riding high on Vanessa's money and Damien's mistakes. But Damien walked into the boardroom with shoulders squared, his voice carrying a steel edge no one had heard from him in months. "I built this company," he said, letting his gaze sweep over the men and women seated around the polished table. "And I won't stand by while a thief and a liar dismantle it for scraps." Paul smirked from the other end of the table. Bold words from a man whose empire is crumbling. Crumbled. Damien leaned forward. No. Bruised, maybe. Betrayed, absolutely. But broken? Not yet. And not while I'm still standing. The board shifted uneasily. For weeks, they had seen Damien silent, slumped, defeated. Now his voice carried a fire that demanded attention. Paul chuckled. "You think a speech will save you?" Damien's lips curled into something between a smile and a snarl. "No. But exposing you will." He slapped a file onto the table. Inside was evidence his team had been quietly gathering for weeks. Paul's misuse of company funds, shady side deals, the offshore accounts he thought no one had noticed. Damien had played the long game in silence, waiting for the moment Paul grew too cocky. Gasps rippled through the boardroom as the pages turned. Paul's smirk faltered. Damien sat back, his voice calm now. "Consider this my first step toward reclaiming what's mine." But exposing Paul wasn't enough. That evening, Damien returned home to the Triplets. They clung to him as always, their small arms wrapping around his waist, their eyes searching for reassurance he wasn't sure he could give. "Daddy," one of them whispered, "when will Miss Naomi come back?" The question tore through him. He crouched, brushing a hand over his daughter's hair. "I don't know," he admitted softly. "But I'm going to try to bring her back. Not because she has to. Because she deserves to know she's wanted." The children's faces brightened, fragile hope glimmering in their eyes. And Damien knew then that his choice wasn't just about him. It was about showing his children what real love looked like, unselfish, vulnerable, relentless. He started small. That night, after they went to bed, Damien sat at his desk and drafted another letter to Naomi. Not the broken plea he had written weeks ago and tucked away in a drawer, but something honest, something stripped bare. "Naomi, every day without you has shown me the truth. You weren't just keeping my children alive, you were keeping me alive too. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know I've chosen to fight, not for wealth, not for pride, but for you. For us. If you can't return, I'll still be grateful for every moment you gave me. But if you can, I'll spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice." His hand trembled as he signed his name. He didn't mail it. Not yet. Naomi deserved action, not just words. 2 days later, Damien made his move. He called Vanessa. She answered with a sneer in her voice. Finally decided to crawl back. "No," he said evenly. "I'm offering you a choice. Walk away quietly with what you have, or stay and watch everything you think you've won collapse beneath you. Her laughter was sharp, brittle. You think you scare me, Damien? Paul and I have everything now. You're nothing but a man begging for scraps. Maybe, Damien said. But at least I'm not begging for respect from a woman who betrays everyone she touches. Her laughter faltered then, just for a second. He heard the edge of panic buried in her bravado. Because deep down, Vanessa knew. Paul wasn't loyal. He never had been. And Damien had planted the seeds to unravel their scheme. I'll see you in court, Damien finished coldly, and hung up before she could reply. That night, Damien sat with the triplets on the floor of the living room, building towers out of blocks. Their laughter filled the penthouse in a way that made the silence less unbearable. One of the boys looked up at him suddenly. "Daddy, are you happy again?" Damien froze. The question was so innocent, so direct, it pierced the armor he had built. He forced a smile. "Not yet. But I'm trying." And in that moment, he realized the truth. Rebuilding his company, defeating Paul, putting Vanessa in her place, all of it mattered. But none of it would mean anything if he didn't fight for Naomi. She wasn't just his maid. She wasn't just the woman who had saved his children. She was the woman who had saved him. And now, it was his turn to save her. The next morning, Damien called his driver and gave him an address he hadn't dared utter in weeks. The modest part of the city where Naomi had gone after leaving his home. He didn't know if she would open the door. He didn't know if she would slam it in his face. But it was time to make the choice. And Damien had already made it. He wasn't going to let fear decide for him anymore. Naomi hadn't expected the knock. Her evenings had settled into a rhythm since leaving the mansion. Quiet meals at her small kitchen table, folding laundry while the radio hummed softly in the background, long prayers whispered before bed. It was a life of simplicity, of survival. She told herself she didn't miss the penthouse, the glittering skyline, the chaos of 3 little voices calling her name. But she did. Every night, she thought of the children. She could almost hear their laughter echoing in her tiny apartment, see their faces pressed against the window as they begged for bedtime stories. And sometimes, though she tried to suppress it, she thought of Damien. Not the cold, suspicious man who had accused her. Not the broken shell who let betrayal steal his fire. But the glimpses she had seen when his pride faltered. The man who read to his children in tired whispers, who watched them sleep as though they were his last tether to life. The man who, in unguarded moments, had looked at her with something she couldn't name. So when the knock came, her heart raced. She opened the door slowly, expecting perhaps a neighbor, perhaps the landlady. But it was him. Damien stood in the dim hallway, shoulders squared, suit slightly rumpled, his eyes weary but alive in a way she hadn't seen in months. He held no flowers, no gifts, just himself. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then Naomi stepped back. "You shouldn't be here." Damien entered cautiously, his eyes flicking over the modest apartment. The cracked tiles, the worn sofa, the photos of Naomi's family on the walls. It was a world so different from his own, yet somehow, he felt more at home here than he had in his penthouse. "I know," he said softly, "but I had to see you." Naomi crossed her arms, her body stiff. "Why? To accuse me again? To remind me of what I don't belong to?" His face tightened. "No. To admit I was wrong." She laughed, a sharp sound. "Wrong? Damien, you didn't just make a mistake, you tore me apart. You let your wife's poison and your pride blind you, and I was the one who paid the price." "I know," he said again, his voice raw. "And I hate myself for it. Naomi, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to trust me again. But I need you to hear me when I say, I choose you. Not as a servant. Not as someone who held me together when I was falling apart. But as you. As the woman I—" He stopped, the word lodged in his throat. as the woman I can't stop thinking about." Naomi's chest tightened. She turned away, blinking fast. "You don't know what you're saying. You're lonely, you're desperate. I'm convenient." "No," he said, stepping closer. "You were never convenient. You were salvation. And I treated you like a threat." The silence stretched, heavy and aching. Naomi's hands trembled at her sides. Finally, she whispered, "Do you know what it cost me to walk away? I loved those children like my own. Every night, I wonder if they miss me. Every morning, I fight the urge to run back just to hold them again. And you," her voice cracked, "you made me believe I was nothing to them. That I was nothing to you." Damien's eyes glistened. "You were everything. I was just too blind to see it." Naomi barely slept that night. After Damien left with the triplets, reluctantly, with promises they'd see her soon, she sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the small cracks in her ceiling as tears dried on her cheeks. His words replayed in her mind. "I choose you. Not as a servant. Not as someone who held me together when I was falling apart. But as you." She wanted to believe him. But wounds didn't vanish overnight. Trust, once broken, didn't heal just because the one who broke it said they were sorry. She had clawed her way back from too many betrayals in her life to leap blindly again. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she saw the triplets' faces, heard their voices, shrill with joy as they shouted her name, felt their arms wrapped tight around her waist, as though they'd never let go. Her heart, stubborn as it was, whispered the truth she didn't want to admit. She wasn't only fighting Damien. She was fighting herself. Damien, on the other hand, lay awake in his penthouse with the children curled against him. They had begged him not to leave Naomi's apartment, to let them stay with her. He had promised them that if they were patient, they'd see her again. But even he didn't know if that promise would hold. He had laid everything bare. He had chosen her with words, with actions, with humility. Now the choice wasn't his anymore, it was Naomi's. The thought terrified him. For a man who had built empires and silenced boardrooms, to admit that his future lay in someone else's hands, it was almost unbearable. But that was the point, wasn't it? Love wasn't control. It wasn't dominance. It wasn't ownership. It was surrender. And for the first time, Damien understood what it meant to surrender without losing. 2 days later, Naomi found herself standing in front of the glass tower that bore Damien's name. She had told herself she wouldn't come. She had promised herself she would keep her distance, that she wouldn't be swayed by tears or children's laughter or a man's desperate words. But her feet had carried her here anyway. Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity. Executives whispered in corners, secretaries darted across marble floors, phones rang endlessly. Naomi felt out of place in her modest dress, clutching her worn handbag. But when she stepped into the elevator, her reflection in the mirrored walls didn't look afraid. She looked determined. Damien was in the middle of a board meeting when the door opened and Naomi walked in. Every head turned. Gasps rippled around the table. Damien froze, mid-sentence, his throat dry, his pulse hammering. Naomi didn't look at anyone but him. "I need to speak with you," she said. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled at her sides. Paul sneered from across the table. "Well, if it isn't the maid. Come to beg for scraps." Naomi's gaze snapped to him, sharp as glass. "I didn't come for scraps. I came for the truth. Something you wouldn't recognize if it was staring you in the face." The room went dead silent. Damien's chest swelled with pride. For all her gentleness, Naomi was steel when she needed to be. He rose from his chair. Meeting adjourned. His voice left no room for argument. In his office, the door closed behind them, Damien finally let the walls fall. "Naomi," he whispered. She held up a hand. "Don't. Let me speak." He nodded, silent. Naomi paced the room, her words tumbling out, raw and unfiltered. I can't do this halfway, Damien. I can't be pulled back into your life only to be discarded when your pride wins again. I can't let the children believe in me if you're going to tear it all apart. I won't, he said, but she silenced him again with a look. You say that now, but words aren't enough. Her voice cracked. Do you even know what it cost me to love those children? To leave them? To walk away from you? Damien stepped closer, his voice low but firm. Yes. Because I feel the cost every second of every day without you. Naomi's breath caught. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, he continued. But I can promise I'll never make that mistake again. Not doubting you. Not letting pride blind me to the truth. You're not a servant. You're not a crutch. You're the only woman who's ever made me want to be more than the man I was. Naomi's eyes filled. For a moment, neither moved. The hum of the city outside the glass windows was the only sound. Then slowly, cautiously, she whispered, If I let you try, it's not just about me. It's about them. If you fail me, you fail them too. Damien swallowed hard. I know. And I won't. The door burst open suddenly. Vanessa stormed in, her face twisted with fury. Paul trailed behind her, his smugness cracked by the humiliation of the boardroom. So this is it. Vanessa hissed. You throw away everything we built together for her? Damien turned, his voice sharp. We didn't build anything together, Vanessa. You tore it apart. And now it's over. Naomi stiffened, but Damien moved closer to her, his hand hovering just near hers. Not touching, not forcing, just steady, a silent promise. Paul sneered. You think the board will side with you after today's stunt? You think they'll stand behind you and He shot Naomi a look of disdain. Maid. Damien's voice cut through the room like steel. They'll stand behind integrity. Something you'll never understand. For the first time, Vanessa faltered. Paul's confidence wavered. And Naomi. Naomi saw it. The man Damien had always been capable of being. Not the tyrant, not the broken shell, but the man who chose truth, even when it cost him. When they were gone, Naomi turned back to him. Her walls weren't gone. Not yet. But they were crumbling, piece by piece. Damien, she whispered, her voice trembling, don't make me regret this. He shook his head, his eyes glistening. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you don't. And for the first time since she had walked away, Naomi allowed herself to hope. Naomi turned, searching his face for deceit, for weakness. But all she saw was a man stripped of his armor, standing in her shabby apartment with nothing to offer but the truth. She sank onto the sofa, her head in her hands. Damien, I can't go through that pain again. I can't risk it. I built walls around my heart for a reason, and you, she looked up at him, her eyes blazing. You broke through them, only to tear everything apart. Damien knelt in front of her, his hands trembling but steady as they reached for hers. He didn't force her to take them. He just let them hover, an offering. I can't erase what I did, he said quietly. But I can spend the rest of my life proving I'll never do it again. You don't have to decide now. You don't ever have to decide. Just, let me try. Naomi's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to throw herself into his arms and feel whole again. But fear clawed at her chest. What if he failed her again? What if her heart couldn't survive it? The knock of small fists against the door broke the moment. Naomi's eyes widened. What? But Damien already knew. He had brought them. The triplets tumbled into the apartment, their voices shrill with excitement. Miss Naomi. They crashed into her, arms around her waist, faces buried against her. Naomi's tears spilled freely as she held them, kissing their heads, whispering their names. Damien watched, his chest aching, his choice solidified in the sight of his children clinging to the only woman who had ever made them feel safe. When Naomi finally looked up at him, her face was wet with tears. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "You can't bring them here to sway me." "I didn't bring them to sway you," Damien said softly. "I brought them because they needed you. And so do I." For a long moment, Naomi said nothing. She rocked the children gently, their small arms locked around her. Finally, she whispered, "Damien, I don't know if I can trust you again." But her voice broke. "I can't stop loving them." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't surrender. But it was the first crack in the wall. And for Damien, it was enough to hope. The days that followed were like walking on cracked glass. Naomi didn't move back into the penthouse immediately. Instead, she agreed to visit on certain days, spending time with the triplets, easing herself back into their lives. Damien honored her boundaries. He didn't push, didn't plead. He simply showed up, steady, patient, a man proving with action what words could no longer carry. For the children, her return was like spring after a bitter winter. They clung to her when she arrived, followed her from room to room, begged her to stay past dinner. Every goodbye ended in tears, though Naomi gently reminded them she'd be back soon. Damien watched quietly, torn between gratitude and longing. Seeing Naomi in the house again filled him with hope, but it also deepened the ache. He wanted her there permanently. He wanted her laughter to echo in the halls, her presence to anchor them all. But this time, he knew better than to rush. Vanessa and Paul, however, weren't done. Their empire of theft was collapsing. Damien's revelations had spread through the business world, and lawsuits loomed. Investors abandoned them in droves. Worse, whispers surfaced that Paul was diverting funds from Vanessa herself, siphoning money into hidden accounts. Vanessa stormed into a hotel suite one night to confront him, only to find the room stripped bare, Paul gone, with what little remained of her stolen fortune. The betrayal cut deep. She had left a husband who, for all his flaws, had built something real, for a man who left her with nothing. Alone, disgraced, Vanessa turned her eyes back toward the life she had burned. Toward Damien. It was on a Sunday afternoon, when Naomi had taken the triplets to the park, that Vanessa appeared at the penthouse. Damien was in his study, reviewing documents, when the sound of the door opening drew him out. He froze when he saw her standing there, hair disheveled, eyes red, her once perfect composure shattered. "Damien," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake." He said nothing. She stepped closer, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Paul's gone. He stole everything. I was wrong about him, about us. I should never have left you. Please, let's try again. For the children, if nothing else." Damien's heart didn't stir. Not with love, not with anger. Only pity. "Vanessa," he said quietly, "the children already have someone who loves them. And I've already made my choice." Her face twisted. "Her? The maid?" His voice was firm, steady. "Naomi. The woman who stayed when you left. The woman who gave them a family when you tore it apart. That's who I'm building my life with now." Vanessa's lip trembled. She had expected anger, maybe even a spark of old affection. But the calm finality in his voice broke her more than rage ever could. "The children," she whispered desperately. "At least let me see them." Damien's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "They're your children too. You can visit. But that's all." When Naomi returned with the triplets and saw Vanessa sitting stiffly in the living room, tension filled the air like a storm. The children froze, their joy faltering. "Mommy?" one of them whispered, but their steps didn't carry them forward. Instead, they clutched Naomi's hands tighter, their small bodies pressing against her. Naomi bent down, whispering gently, "It's okay. Go say hello." But they shook their heads, tears welling in their eyes. "We don't want to." The rejection sliced through Vanessa, her hands trembling as the children clung tighter to Naomi. Naomi met Damien's eyes. His expression was unreadable, but his presence beside her was unyielding. Vanessa straightened, blinking furiously to hold back her tears. "Fine," she whispered. "If that's how it is." She stood, her voice breaking. "Just, let me know when I can visit." Damien nodded once. "We'll arrange a schedule." And just like that, Vanessa walked out, her heels clicking across the marble floor, her shadow disappearing from their lives. That evening, after the children were asleep, Damien and Naomi stood together on the balcony. The city sprawled beneath them, lights glittering like fallen stars. "You didn't have to let her visit," Naomi said softly. "I did," Damien replied. "For the children. Even if they're not ready now, they deserve the chance to choose for themselves. But she doesn't get to break us again. Not this time." Naomi's heart stirred at the word us. For weeks, she had resisted naming what was growing between them. But standing there, with his hand brushing against hers, the night air cool around them, she realized the truth. She had already chosen too. Not because he was perfect. Not because all her fear was gone. But because love wasn't about certainty. It was about faith. Slowly, she slipped her hand into his. Damien's grip tightened, his breath catching. And for the first time, it felt like home. The days after Vanessa's visit carried a fragile peace. For the first time in years, the mansion didn't feel like a battleground. It wasn't filled with tension or accusations, but with laughter, the triplets' giggles echoing through the halls, the sound of Naomi reading bedtime stories, and Damien's steady presence anchoring it all. Naomi remained cautious. She didn't immediately move back into the penthouse, instead choosing to stay in her modest apartment across town. But with each day, the boundaries blurred. She stayed later in the evenings, cooked dinners with Damien, helped the triplets with homework at the large dining table. Sometimes she fell asleep on the couch, only to wake to Damien covering her with a blanket before retreating to his study. For Damien, every small step felt monumental. He knew he couldn't rush her, not after everything they had endured. But he also knew this was different. Naomi wasn't staying because she had no choice. She was staying because she wanted to. One Friday evening, as the city glowed beneath the penthouse windows, Damien surprised Naomi with something unexpected. "Come with me," he said after dinner, when the children had scampered off to play. Naomi arched an eyebrow. "Where?" "You'll see." Reluctantly, she let him lead her out of the apartment. They descended into the private garage, where his car waited. The drive was quiet, filled with the soft hum of the engine and the low rhythm of the city at night. Naomi glanced at him occasionally, curiosity in her eyes, but Damien kept his gaze forward. When they finally stopped, Naomi's breath caught. It wasn't a fancy restaurant or a lavish ballroom. It was a quiet playground in the suburbs, the very park where Naomi often took the triplets. "Damien," she whispered. "I wanted to show you something," he said, walking toward the swings. He gestured to the playground equipment, worn but well kept. "This was where my mother used to bring me when I was their age. It's one of the only good memories I have from my childhood." Naomi's chest tightened as she watched him. For the first time, she saw him not as the CEO, not as the betrayed husband, but as a boy who had once been small and fragile too. "She used to tell me," Damien continued softly, "that no matter how heavy the world feels, there's always a place you can run to. A place that reminds you who you are." He turned to her, his eyes holding hers. "This has always been that place for me. Now, I want it to be our place. For you, for me, for the kids." Naomi's throat ached with unshed tears. "Damien," she whispered again, her voice breaking. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out tentatively. "Naomi, I can't change the past. But I can promise you this, I'll never make you feel small, or hidden, or unworthy. I don't want you to stand behind me. I want you beside me." The words melted the last of her defenses. Her hand slid into his, trembling, and she whispered the truth she had kept buried for too long. "I was never afraid of you, Damien. I was afraid of how much I loved you." His chest tightened, his grip on her hand firm. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with everything they had endured, the betrayal, the loss, the slow healing. And now, with one step, they closed the distance. When his lips finally touched hers, it wasn't desperate or hurried. It was steady grounding, a promise sealed not by passion alone but by trust. Naomi's tears wet his cheeks, and his arms tightened around her, as if anchoring them both. For the first time, the cracks in their hearts didn't feel like wounds. They felt like the seams of something stronger being forged. Back at the penthouse, the triplets noticed the change immediately. "You're smiling more, Daddy," one of them teased. Naomi blushed, trying to hide her face, but Damien only chuckled. "Maybe that's because someone reminds me what's worth smiling for." The children cheered, their laughter filling the room as they climbed onto Naomi's lap. For Damien, it was the moment he had longed for, the family whole again, not because of wealth or appearances, but because of love. He didn't need boardrooms or fortune to feel rich. He only needed this: Naomi's hand in his children's laughter, the knowledge that despite everything, they had rebuilt something unbreakable. But that night, when the children were tucked in, Damien and Naomi stood once again on the balcony, gazing over the glittering city. "Do you ever think," Naomi whispered, "that all of this, the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it was the only way we could find each other like this?" Damien thought for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Maybe the fire had to burn everything down before we could see what really mattered." He turned, his hand brushing hers. "And what mattered was never the mansion, or the company, or the name. It was you. It's always been you." Naomi's heart swelled, and this time, she didn't hold back. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest, and for the first time in her life, she believed she was exactly where she belonged. The weeks following Damien and Naomi's kiss became a gentle unraveling of walls that had once seemed unbreakable. For years, Damien had thought love was a battlefield of negotiations and sacrifices, but with Naomi it was different. There was no performance, no need for armor. Their days became stitched with small moments, shared breakfasts, children's laughter echoing down the halls, quiet evenings where silence itself felt like a companion rather than a weight. Naomi didn't rush into declaring herself back. She still returned to her modest apartment at night, but her stays stretched longer each time. What began as late dinners turned into evenings curled on the couch watching the triplets fall asleep. Soon, the children began asking without hesitation, "Mommy, are you staying tonight?" Their innocent voices broke through whatever hesitation Naomi carried. One Friday, when the triplets begged her once again, she looked at Damien and said softly, "Maybe I should just move back." Damien's heart surged, but he hid it behind a tender smile. "Only if you're ready, Naomi." She looked at the children, who were clinging to her arms and waist, and then back at him. "I think we all are." The day she returned for good, the household shifted. Naomi brought warmth with her, filling the cold penthouse with colors and textures Damien hadn't realized were missing. She planted fresh flowers in the balconies, filled the kitchen with the aroma of home-cooked meals, and more importantly, she brought a rhythm of love the triplets had craved. One night, Damien found her in the kitchen baking cookies with the children, flour smudged on her cheek, laughter spilling from her lips. He leaned in the doorway, watching. The sight stirred something inside him that no business victory ever had. This messy, imperfect, joyful scene was wealth beyond measure. Naomi noticed his gaze and blushed, swatting at him with a wooden spoon. "Don't just stand there, Mr. CEO. Wash your hands and help." He obeyed, grinning like a boy again. Meanwhile, Vanessa's visits began. She arrived once a week, carefully scheduled, greeted at the door by a wary nanny or sometimes Damien himself. The triplets were distant at first, clinging to Naomi whenever Vanessa appeared. They would retreat to their rooms, refusing her hugs, their mistrust clear. Vanessa fought to hide her pain, but Naomi, though cautious, encouraged the children gently. "She's still your mother," she would remind them softly. One afternoon, Vanessa broke down in the presence of Naomi after yet another failed attempt at reconnection. "They hate me," she whispered, tears streaking her face. Naomi shook her head. "They don't hate you. They're hurt. But if you're consistent, if you're patient, maybe one day they'll let you in again." It stunned Vanessa, the kindness of the very woman she had once scorned. For Damien, it was a powerful confirmation. Naomi's love wasn't born from bitterness or revenge. It was real, selfless, the kind that healed rather than destroyed. Damien's company, too, found its revival. With Vanessa and Paul exposed, clients and investors rallied around his honesty and resilience. It wasn't the empire it once was, but it was leaner, stronger, built on trust rather than illusion. During one late board meeting, Damien looked across the polished table at his colleagues. "I thought losing everything would be the end of me. But it taught me what matters. We don't build legacies with profits alone. We build them with integrity, with family, with truth." The words earned quiet nods, but more importantly, they echoed what he already lived at home. The final thread of their healing came unexpectedly. One evening, Naomi sat with the triplets, showing them old photographs of her childhood. Pictures of her in worn clothes, standing outside a crumbling house. Damien watched silently, realizing for the first time how far she had come, how much she had given without ever demanding recognition. When the children had fallen asleep, Damien turned to her. "Naomi, I don't want you to ever feel like you're still the maid in this house. You are my partner, my equal. And if you'll let me, I want to make it official." Her breath caught, her hand trembling as he took it. "Damien." He didn't kneel. He didn't present diamonds or spectacle. Instead, he looked her in the eyes, raw and unguarded. "I don't need the world to witness it. Just you. Just the children. Will you marry me, Naomi?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes." His arms wrapped around her, and for the first time since his world had fallen apart, Damien felt whole. The wedding was small, intimate, held in the same park where Damien had once revealed his childhood memories. The triplets served as ring-bearers and flower girls, giggling through the ceremony. Naomi wore a simple white dress, radiant not with wealth but with peace. When Damien kissed her, the crowd of close friends and allies cheered, but it was the children's laughter that sealed the moment. In the distance, Vanessa stood quietly watching. She didn't interrupt, didn't protest. For once, she respected the boundary. Tears glistened in her eyes, not of jealousy, but of acceptance. As the sun set, Damien held Naomi's hand and looked out at his family. Once, he had believed his life was defined by skyscrapers and boardrooms, by deals and profits. But now he knew the truth. His legacy wasn't his company. It was them. Naomi. The children. The love that had risen from betrayal, stronger than steel, brighter than gold. And as laughter filled the air, Damien whispered against Naomi's ear, "We made it." She smiled, leaning into him. "No, Damien. We found it." Together, they turned toward the future, not as broken survivors of betrayal, but as a family, whole at last. Damien and Naomi's love triumphed over betrayal, wealth, and heartbreak, ending in family and renewal. Do you believe true love is always worth waiting for, no matter the trials? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to tell us what part of this journey moved you the most. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. Don't forget to like, share. So do check it out. Also turn on the notification bell so you don't miss when we post stories like this. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.